English translation 136th Contact Part 4. Tuesday, 14th of October 1980, 23:41 HRs.
Mullah protest from a wheelchair.
Tears and threats against the USA yesterday in the Iranian parliament. Several MPs injured in Sunday's attack had been brought into the assembly hall in wheelchairs. "Death to Satan, America!" shouted the parliamentarians as they commemorated the 74 victims. At the same time, a large number of human beings were again executed in Tehran, and the underground organization Front for National Equality again called for resistance.
Blick Zurich, Thursday, 2nd July, 1981.
Iran, revolutionary tribunals legalized.
Tehran, 8th of July. SDA-AFP, Iran's fundamentalist-dominated parliament, legalized the revolutionary tribunals on Wednesday. The text, adopted by 128 votes to 52, thus gives the revolutionary tribunals a legal statute that was not provided for in the Iranian constitution. In particular, Article 4 of the new law gives the revolutionary judges a completely free hand to pass judgment in accordance with the principles of Islam. The perpetrators of such diverse offenses as provocation and incitement of the people with a political aim, formation of corrupt gangs, or simply acts against God can now be sentenced. The formula of crime against God, already commonly used in sentences, seems vague enough to allow the conviction of any person classified as an opponent of the regime. The only way out for the accused seems to be repentance. According to the prosecutor of the Tehran Revolutionary Tribunal, Lajavardi, anyone who declares himself to be a Paykari Marxist-Leninist will be sentenced to death and executed. Only sincere repentance can save, as the Tehran newspaper Kayhan reported on Wednesday. 5 followers of the People's Mujahideen in the eastern Iranian province of Khorasan came to the mosque to express their remorse and condemn the criminal acts, and the believers welcomed them with open arms, Kayhan noted.
Tagesanzeiger, Zürich, Thursday, 9th July, 1980.
Russian atomic bomb tests to blame for Iran earthquake.
Tehran Bochum, underground nuclear bomb tests by the Soviet Union, are said to be to blame for the severe earthquake in Iran that claimed between 3,000 and 5,000 lives on Thursday. This is claimed by Professor Heinz Kaminsky of the Bochum Institute for Space Research. In the Western Urals and in Semipalatinsk, the Soviets had carried out such experiments at the end of May. Kaminsky: from there, a fault zone in the Earth's crust runs southwest and is tangential to Iran. Earthquakes occur near and in the far field of such experiments.
Blick Zurich, Friday, 31st July, 1981.
In 2 weeks, 140 human beings executed.
London, 7th July. AP, DDP, Reuters, AFP. The Iranian authorities have ordered the closure of the Tehran office of the British news agency Reuters indefinitely, and ordered the agency's 3 journalists working in Iran to leave the country within 48 hours. The wave of executions in Iran also continued on Tuesday in various cities. 9 human beings lost their lives. The official news agency Pars reported that the executed were leaders of the leftist Mujahideen and a trade unionist. All were charged with offenses against the Islamic Republic. This brings to about 140 the number of human beings executed in Iran since the strict crackdown by the revolutionary authorities on political opponents a little over a fortnight ago. Since Monday, 36 executions of enemies of the Islamic Revolution have been officially announced. The revolutionary authorities reported the arrest of over 40 People's Mujahideen on Tuesday. Among them is Khalil Hajbachi, the former head of the liaison office between the people and the president. He is accused of trying to stir up trouble and kill innocent human beings in support of deposed President Bani Sadr. A larger explosive device was discovered and defused in a mosque in Tehran. According to official sources, the bomb was supposed to explode when the lights were turned off. A note was found with the bomb, signed by a workers' association, with the following text: "The first was a tragedy, the next will be a disaster." Radio Tehran had announced the closure of the Reuters agency office, saying that the British press office had been a center for conspiracy against the Islamic Revolution. During the past month alone, the Tehran Reuters office had spread tendentious and untrue reports and ignored official warnings in more than 10 cases, the station reported. According to the Reuters spokesperson, the Iranian Ministry of Islamic Guidance has informed the 3 Tehran correspondents, Bureau Chief Barry May, and reporters Alan Phillips and Phil Davison, that a review of Reuters reports from Tehran conducted by the official Iranian news agency Pars found the coverage to be doctored. Most Western news agencies, Associated Press AP and United Press International UPI, have been forced to suspend their operations in Iran under similar accusations. Iran does not want to follow either the East or the West in its foreign policy, but, in the words of its new foreign minister Hussein Mousavi, go its own way independent of the superpowers. Mousavi announced changes in Iran's foreign policy, as the goals of the Islamic Revolution prioritize the concerns of Islamic and Middle Eastern countries and the oppressed peoples. The size of Iranian embassies would be staffed according to the importance of each country. The closure of diplomatic missions would mainly affect Western countries. Iran will only maintain as many staff there as is necessary to deal with the concerns of students and other important issues.
Tagesanzeiger Zürich, Wednesday, 8th July 1918.
It cannot be otherwise with one such who has gotten very badly out of control of the good human nature.
Unfortunately, that is correct. But continue to listen. I already told you about the severe quake in China, which can be expected, in particular, in the area around Sichuan. After the events that you mentioned earlier, this Chinese seismic zone will suffer from severe floods, resulting in deaths that will amount to about 4,700.
China, flooding continues.
Peking 19th July. AP, devastating floods in parts of China, which have killed 3,000 to 4,000 human beings and left hundreds of thousands homeless in recent days, TA on Saturday, also continued on Sunday. In China, where the flood disaster in Sichuan province was particularly severe, the authorities said on Saturday that up to 4,000 people had died and 50,000 to 100,000 were injured. The flood waves of the Yangtze River, which carried a record 72,000 cubic meters of water per second, passed the construction site of the Gezhuba Dam in Hubei province on Sunday, without causing much damage to this, China's largest dam construction site. After passing the construction site, the water masses reached the city of Shaxi in Hubei province on Sunday afternoon. This area had already been devastated by floods last year. The government deployed 200,000 soldiers and civilians to protect the dikes along a nearly 200-kilometer stretch of the river. 500,000 human beings were left homeless, it said. More heavy rains were expected in Sichuan early this week. However, the authorities assured that no new, too severe damage was expected. People have been told to move their belongings to higher ground. Factories had also taken precautionary measures.
Many dead also in India.
Delhi, 19th July. AP heavy monsoon downpours continued over the weekend in the northwestern Indian sub-state of Rajasthan, which has been hit by catastrophic floods. On Saturday, 45 occupants of a bus washed away by raging floodwaters near the capital, Jaipur, drowned. In Jaipur alone, more than 1,000 houses collapsed. In the city of Bikaner, 400 kilometers southwest of Delhi, 600 buildings were damaged.
Tagesanzeiger, Zürich, Monday, 20th of July, 1980.
It will also be the time during which the murderous and criminal Israeli president of the state, Menachem Begin, will again be confirmed into his office, according to which he will immediately command and carry out new murderous attacks on the neighboring countries.
Israel elections, Geneva millionaire to tip the scales. By Tevye S. Newman.
Jerusalem. Jewish Geneva-based multimillionaire Nissim Gaon has it in his hands to decide whether Israel's previous head of government, Menachem Begin 68, will retain power. Although Begin and his conservative Likud bloc missed winning Tuesday's parliamentary elections by one seat, he could form a new coalition government with the help of the Genevan. For the powerful Nissim Gaon is a financier and thus head of the Tami party, which has won 3 parliamentary seats. And with these 3 seats of the North African and Mediterranean Jews, Begin would have an absolute majority in the 120-member parliament, the Knesset. Precondition: Begin must also unite the moderate national religious and the Orthodox Jews behind him. The calculation works. These 2 parties together have 11 seats, Begin 48, and the Tami people of Nissim Gaon 3 seats. Gaon sent his closest advisor to Israel by special plane immediately after the election results were known. Negotiations are underway, and Begin declared confidently yesterday, "There is no question for me. We will form the new government together." Nevertheless, President Yitzhak Navo is expected to give opposition leader Shimon Peres, 58, who won the elections with his Labor Party, a chance first. But Peres, with his 49 seats, has no prospects of rallying a viable majority around him. The election winner risks being left behind as a loser.
Blick, Zurich, Thursday, 2nd July, 1981.
Begin will stop at nothing.
Jerusalem. In his fight for re-election as Israeli Prime Minister, Menachem Begin will stop at nothing. Now he has revealed to the public a top-secret letter from opposition leader Shimon Peres. In the letter, the Labor Party leader had asked him not to carry out the bombing of the Iraqi nuclear facility at Tammuz. Begin promptly distributed the letter to the members of the Foreign Affairs and Defense Policy Committee of the Parliament. From there, it also reached the press. In the meantime, U.S. President Reagan has punished Begin for his commando action in Iraq. The USA does not want to deliver any more fighter planes to Israel until further notice.
Blick, Zurich, Friday, 12th of June, 1981.
Likud leader wants to form a 4-party coalition. Israel, Begin now officially election winner.
Jerusalem, 9th July. Reuters AP, the Likud bloc of incumbent Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin, has emerged victorious in the June 30th parliamentary elections with a 1-seat lead over the Labor Party. According to the final results published in Jerusalem on Thursday, the Likud bloc won 48 seats in the 120-seat Knesset parliament, while the Labor Party won 47. The Likud bloc received 10,405 votes more than the Labor Party. The turnout was 78%. Menachem Begin had already declared on Wednesday that he had the necessary absolute majority of 61 MPs to form a government. Begin wants to form a coalition with 13 MPs from 3 religious parties, the National Religious Party NRP, the Tami Party, and the Aguda Israel. Begin said he does not rule out a coalition with Moshe Dayan's Telem Group 2 seats or the right-wing Tehiyah Party 3 seats. Reports about a possible appointment of Conservative Agriculture Minister Ariel Sharon as the new defense minister were neither confirmed nor denied by Begin in the TV program. He explained that he had refrained from appointing Sharon as defense minister in the last government because of the expected opposition in the cabinet. Sharon is one of the advocates of Israel's settlement policy in the occupied territories. Begin announced the continuation of the settlement policy. We will add houses and human beings. Our main concern is to get more Jews to live in Judea and Samaria West Bank, the Prime Minister said. Government sources said that despite consistent conversations among the parties, President Yitzhak Navon would not formally task Begin with forming a government until early next week at the earliest. The final voting result was as follows.
Tagesanzeiger. Zürich, Friday, 10th July 1980.
This time, bomb attacks on the Lebanese capital will be part of the plan, which will cause hundreds of deaths to be lamented over as a result of several attacks by the Israeli Air Force.
Israeli airstrike on southern Lebanon.
Beirut, 10th July. AP, Israeli warplanes attacked Palestinian positions in southern Lebanon with bombs and rockets on Friday. This is according to PLO communique released by the Israeli military command in Tel Aviv and in Beirut. The target of the operation was the area around Habush, Wadi al-Akhdar and Aktanet. Lebanese radio reported in the evening that 3 people were killed and 20 wounded in the attacks.
Tagesanzeiger Zürich, Saturday, 11th July 1980.
Israelis shoot down Syrian MiG.
Beirut, 14th of July. AFP, at least 19 human beings were killed and 28 others injured in Israeli airstrikes on Tuesday. This was according to a preliminary count by press correspondents at hospitals in the city of Saida. The Israeli airstrikes lasted for about 2 hours and ended at 18H Hayyur Sest. In the course of the attacks, there was a dogfight with Syrian aircraft, during which one of the Syrian MiG-23s was shot down.
Tagesanzeiger Zürich, Wednesday, 15th July 1980.
Israeli bombs, 120 dead.
Beirut, Israeli warplanes bombed the Lebanese capital Beirut several times yesterday, firing missiles at it. Over 120 human beings were killed and more than 500 injured, some seriously. Many of the victims of this first Israeli attack on Beirut in 3 years are civilians. An eyewitness: entire apartment blocks collapsed like houses of cards. Thousands of residents fled the city. The Defense Ministry in Jerusalem said the target of this retaliatory strike was Palestinian terrorists. Palestinians had shelled Israeli border towns on Thursday, killing 3 civilians. The Israeli High Command said the attacks had destroyed the headquarters of al-Fatah and PLO terrorists. A PLO spokesman, on the other hand, described this information as exaggerated. In the meantime, the Lebanese government has called for a special session of the UN Security Council.
Blick Zürich, Saturday, 18th July 1981.
New Israeli strike against southern Lebanon.
Beirut, Tel Aviv, 23rd July. AP, despite growing criticism of its actions, Israel on Thursday again used its air force to strike targets in southern Lebanon. According to the Israeli High Command, fighter jets attacked gun emplacements of Palestinian free fighters in southeastern Lebanon near Hasbajah at the foot of the Hermon Massif. All Israeli aircraft returned safely from the enemy flight. The pilots reported scoring direct hits. The Palestine Liberation Organization (PLO) announced that the Israeli aircraft had destroyed a strategically important bridge. According to the Palestinian news agency Wafa, 6 towns between the port of Tyre and Hasbadja in the Bekaa Valley came under resolution on Thursday afternoon. Of the 30 deaths counted in southern Lebanon on Wednesday, 20 alone were killed when Israeli warplanes bombed 2 auxiliary footbridges over the Litani River, 8 kilometers north of Tyre. The victims were on the footbridges at the time of the attacks.
Tagesanzeiger, Zürich, Friday, 24th July, 1980.
This will be a result of the greed-driven madness of Begin, and will be further proof that the people of Begin all around the earth can practically allow themselves to do anything under the protection of his powerful, allied large and small countries, because the leaders of these countries are blind to the true plans of Israel.
Israel bombs PLO headquarters in Beirut.
Beirut, Tel Aviv, 17th July. Reuters, AFP, AP, massive Israeli airstrikes on Palestinian command centers and supply routes in Lebanon killed 123 human beings on Friday, according to a report by the Palestinian news agency Wafa. More than 500 human beings were injured. The targets were in the capital Beirut and in the south of the country. The Israeli High Command in Tel Aviv said the headquarters of al-Fatah and the Popular Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine in the western part of Beirut had been destroyed. The planes had returned safely. Following the Israeli airstrikes, the Palestinians' highest military council, chaired by PLO leader Yasser Arafat, convened for a special session. A spokesman for the council held the U.S. and President Ronald Reagan partly responsible for the Israeli action, which hit civilian targets such as schools, universities, and mosques. The Palestinians would continue their policy of confrontation with Israel, the spokesperson said.
Appeal to Arabs and Security Council.
In a message addressed to Arab kings and heads of state, Arafat on Friday called for increased aid to the Palestinian cause. "I need your sword, not your blessing, to take on the increasing aggressiveness of the enemy." A spokesman for the Lebanese government announced that President Elias Sarkis had instructed his country's UN representation to request a special session of the Security Council because of the Israeli attacks. Sarkis also asked the ambassadors of the United States and the Soviet Union to come and use their influence to put a stop to Israel's actions. Prime Minister Shafik Wassan, meanwhile, summoned the ambassadors of all Arab countries to Beirut and called on them for active and energetic joint assistance to defend themselves against the barbaric attacks. A PLO spokesman described Israeli claims of destruction as exaggerated. He said that al-Fatah's headquarters had not been destroyed, but that 2 residential buildings nearby, which were part of the residential area of Beirut University, had been. Journalists in Beirut reported that the planes flew 6 attacks within 25 minutes, firing missiles at the Chatiya and Sabra camps. At least 5 apartment blocks were destroyed in the Fakehaneh district. 15 human beings were reported killed in Saida Sidon and in the oil port of Sarani. South of it, when an Israeli patrol boat took fire in the coastal area, destroying the coastal road and setting fire to an oil pipeline. The coastal towns of Damour and Sadijat were bombed by a squadron of 12 Israeli aircraft, according to a PLO communiqué. On Friday afternoon, Israeli warplanes flew new airstrikes, according to the High Command in Tel Aviv. 3 bridges over the Litani and Sarani rivers in southern Lebanon were destroyed. Another mission was directed against a regional PLO command center in Al-Bas near the port city of As-Sur Tyre. All aircraft returned undamaged from the enemy flight. Already on Thursday, the Israeli Air Force had destroyed 5 bridges over the Litani and the Sarani in order to cut off the Palestinian guerrillas from their supply connections. The Israeli High Command said that Palestinian rockets had again hit the northern Israeli border area near Nahariya and other parts of the Galilee on Friday morning. 5 people were injured. Israeli artillery returned fire. In a conversation with Israeli radio, Deputy Defense Minister Mordechai Zipori said, "We decided it became necessary to tackle the head directly, and the head is in Beirut." Zipori added that he hoped the guerrillas understood the message. Otherwise, the Israeli government would have to find other means.
PLO appeals to Red Cross.
Geneva, 17th of July. SDA, the PLO, has appealed to the ICRC in Geneva in the face of barbaric attacks by Israel, which is using a terrible war machine supplied by the USA against Lebanese civilians and Palestinian refugee camps. The permanent observer of the Palestine Liberation Organization (PLO) to the international organizations in Geneva, Daoud Barakat, asked the president of the International Committee of the Red Cross ICRC, Alexander Hay, to intervene on Friday so that these criminal acts are put to an end and the severely beleaguered civilian population is given the help it needs. Civilian targets no longer spared Jerusalem, 17th of July. DPA AFP. According to Foreign Minister Shamir, the Israeli army will in future no longer spare even those command centers of the Palestinians, which are located in the middle of civilian areas. In an interview with Radio Jerusalem on Friday, the minister said, "We must take away from the terrorists the immunity they had given themselves by setting up their quarters in civilian surroundings." In the future, however, Israel would also endeavor to spare the Lebanese civilian population. AFP quoted a communiqué published on Friday by the Office of Acting Prime Minister Begin, according to which Israel would no longer show consideration for civilians in future attacks on Palestinian targets.
But when will these clowns finally wise up and smell a rat?
This will, unfortunately, still take a very long time.
Okay, go on.
Up to and by the end of June 1981, 2 facts will arise in your homeland, Switzerland, which are worth mentioning. In the first half of the year 1981, it will result in Switzerland similarly as with the murder cases, in that the number of drug-related deaths will rise so high in the first 6 months of the year that at the end of June, it will be as high as it was in the entire year of 1980.
More and more drug-related deaths. Why?
Zurich, 21st July. The number of drug-related deaths in the canton of Zurich has already risen to 20 this year. The latest drug victim, the 4th in just over a week, is a 22-year-old cook who was found in the toilet of an apartment building in Zurich's Stadtkreis 1 on Monday afternoon. The accumulation of drug deaths in the last few days could be related to the fact that especially pure heroin is currently being traded on the Zurich market, explained a social worker of the Psychiatric Counseling Center for Youth and Drug Problems Drop-In in an interview with the TA. For the fixers, who are usually used to stretched substance, this drug could have a lethal effect in the otherwise usual dose. The Drop-In is of the opinion that the drug situation is alarming. In the last 2 years, a clear increase in drug consumption has been observed. Every week, 20 to 28 so-called initial counseling sessions are conducted at the Drop-In, about 1/3 of which are for heroin addicts.
Tagesanzeiger, Zürich, Wednesday, 22nd July 1982.
Already as many drug deaths as in the whole of 1980.
20 drug victims in the first half of 1981 in the canton of Zurich alone. This corresponds exactly to the number of the entire previous year. The situation is therefore alarming. According to the Psychiatric Counseling Center for Youth and Drug Problems Drop-In, drug consumption has increased drastically in the last 2 years and continues to rise. Social worker Heinz Wissling, who has been working at Drop-In for 4 years, explains the background to the drama.
TA. Is it to be concluded from the significant increase in the number of drug deaths that drug use in general has increased?
Whistling, yes. And this does not surprise us. After all, the drop-in counselling service has been constantly booked up for quite some time.
Interview by Eric Schmid.
TA. How has the number of drop-in counselling sessions developed?
Whistling, we currently conduct between 20 and 28 initial counselling sessions per week. About 1/3 of them are used by heroin addicts who suffer from withdrawal symptoms. In recent years, this number has steadily increased and is constantly rising. A decrease is not foreseeable. Heroin, every shot with risk of death.
TA. According to the responsible authorities, the drug victims so far have always been heroin users. What causes death when this drug is used?
Whistling. Death from heroin injections is rather accidental. A fixer lives in constant danger of injecting an overdose. In fact, he runs a real risk of death with practically every shot. The fact that the number of heroin victims has increased in the last few days and weeks is most likely not related to the general increase in heroin consumption, but rather to the quality of the substance currently available on the black market. This means that there is apparently a lot of good, that is to say pure heroin in circulation, which the fixer, who is used to bad, that is to say cut heroin, can no longer tolerate. Out of sheer habit, the same dose is usually administered, a dose that then has the effect of an overdose, so to speak. If the quality of the heroin were always the same, one could assume that not so many deaths would occur.
Tagesanzeiger, Zürich, Wednesday, 22nd July 1989.
Then, beginning in the middle of July, Switzerland will be inflicted by terrorists, who will move the population into fear and fright through a whole number of bomb attacks in different cities and places, whereby, unfortunately, many humans will be injured, quite apart from the millions worth of property damages.
Bomb at the Federal Palace by Rolf Widmer.
Bern. A bomb exploded yesterday afternoon at the Federal Palace. The explosive device went off at 1412 HRs in a rubbish bin that is attached to the wall in the passage to the Federal Terrace between the Parliament Building and the Bundeshaus West. There was a terrible crash in the Federal Palace, said an official. Passers-by ran away from the tin bucket. An explosive charge had gone off and a car parked next to the bucket was endangered by burning paper. Electric wires were still hanging out of the bucket. The bomb had been detonated with an alarm clock. The supervisor immediately alerted the police. One of 2 explosive charges of 500 grams of explosive had detonated in the waste bucket. Another 500-gram explosive device had failed to detonate. It was pure coincidence that no one was injured, because shortly after 14 HRs, the passageway is heavily frequented by passers-by. No material damage was caused to the Federal Palace because the explosive force was able to escape upwards from the bucket. Shortly after the explosion, the organization 9th June claimed responsibility for the attack. On the 9th of June 1981, a young Armenian was arrested in Geneva after shooting a member of the Turkish consulate.
Blick Zurich, Monday, 20th June 1981.
Another Armenian bomb. 5 injured in Cloton by our reporter Denise Marquardt.
Cloton, 20th July. For the second time in just over 24 hours, the Armenian organization 9th June has carried out an explosive attack in Switzerland. In any case, An anonymous caller on behalf of the organization claimed to have been the author of the heavy explosion on Monday afternoon in the hall of the airport railway station in Zurich-Kloten. According to initial police investigations, the source of the explosion was next to a photo booth directly below a staircase. 5 persons were slightly injured in the attack. Initial estimates put the property damage at around 300,000 Swiss francs. Suddenly we heard an incredibly loud bang. Almost at the same time, parts of the ceiling fell inside the shop and all the window panes burst out of their frames, reported an excited flower seller. A fruit seller from Maranello, the shop is very close to the explosion site, was filling up beer bottles when he felt the loud detonation. At first I thought it was an earthquake. Then I saw a jet of flame burst out of the photo booth and a cloud of smoke immediately formed. According to the cantonal police, the explosion occurred at 1455 HR's right next to a photo booth located under one of the various staircases leading to the shopping plaza. The photo booth and an adjacent photocopier were destroyed. In addition, several shop windows of the surrounding shops and the kiosk were broken. The damage is estimated at around 300,000 Swiss francs. Fortunately, the explosion only caused a few minor injuries, which could be released after outpatient treatment at the airport's medical center. There was no panic, assured a passerby. The only scream I heard was from a small child. By the evening, traffic in the station concourse had returned to normal. Only a large area near the explosion site was cordoned off. The initial forensics did not yet reveal the type of explosive device that had been detonated. Press spokesman Ulrich Krebs of the Federal Department of Justice and Police FDJP explained that the Office of the Attorney General of Switzerland, which is responsible for explosives offenses, initiated a judicial police investigation. Late on Monday afternoon, a man claimed responsibility for the attack in a call to the French news agency AFP in Geneva on behalf of the organization 9th June. The agency thought it recognized the voice of the unknown man who had already claimed responsibility for the attack on the Federal Palace on Sunday TA of Monday. According to Ulrich Krebs, the investigations into this incident had not yielded any new findings by Monday evening.
Tagesanzeiger Zürich, Tuesday, 21st July 1981.
Blick found the nest of bomb sweepers BYP-A, Grenicher from Beirut.
In a dingy office hung with propaganda material in the Palestinian part of Beirut, Blick has discovered the bosses of the terrorists who are waging a bomb war against Switzerland. These fanatics are grimly determined to free the Armenian imprisoned in Geneva for the murder of a Turkish diplomat. As long as the Swiss government does not meet our demands, the actions will continue, Murad Armenian said. Murad is one of the 3 masked underground fighters Blick spoke to. Their organization calls itself the Secret Army for the Liberation of Armenia, Asala. Asala wants to avenge the Turkish atrocities against the Armenian people. It fights for the establishment of an independent Armenian state in eastern Turkey. It wages war on everything that, in its opinion, collaborates with the Turks, also Switzerland. The freedom fighter arrested in Geneva on the 9th of June this year is not a murderer, the Asala people declare. The tough guys admit to having called on all Armenian revolutionaries to take action against Switzerland. Nevertheless, officially they do not want to take responsibility for the mysterious 9th of June organization, which identified itself as the author of the bombs of Bern, Kloten, Lausanne, and Geneva. Asala controls its actions from a corner of the world where even Interpol has to stretch its arms. Beirut is teeming with heavily armed men who often do not know themselves who is friend or foe. It is a city where tanks unexpectedly drive up at street crossings, anti-aircraft guns are brought into position, and 15-year-olds check passers-by identity cards with their rifles ready to fire.
Blick, Zurich, Friday, 31st July 1981.
25 injured. Armenian organization confesses again third bomb, this time in Lausanne.
Lausanne-Bern, 21st July. DDP-SDA. For the third time in 3 days, a bomb attack has been carried out in Switzerland. After the Federal Palace in Bem and Cloten Airport, it was the turn of a department store in Lausanne city center on Tuesday afternoon. Shortly before 4 HRs, an explosive device went off in the ladies' clothing department of Neue Warenhaus AG EPA Show UNIP. 25 persons were injured, some seriously. The Armenian Underground Movement Organization 9th of June claimed responsibility for the crime in an anonymous telephone call. The explosion occurred on the ground floor of the department stores. According to the police, 20 of the 25 persons injured had to be taken to hospital. Some of them were later released. Some persons suffered severe burns to their legs. The injuries were mainly caused by splinters. The explosive device detonated in Lausanne was said to be very similar to the bomb used in Monday's attack at Zurich-Cloten Airport. Under certain circumstances, this explosive device can be as small as a box of matches, since it had been hidden under a clothes rack. The impact had been somewhat muffled. At the time of the explosion, many human beings had been in the department stores. As further explosions had been threatened, the department stores was evacuated. Shortly after 18 HIRs, the French news agency AFP received an anonymous call. The caller was apparently the same man who had already taken responsibility after the attacks in Bem and in Zurich-Cloten. The Lausanne police received tips about a person who was said to be a suspect in connection with the attack in the department stores. A manhunt was immediately launched. According to Ulrich Krebs, spokesman for the FDJP, all possible security measures were initiated by the authorities. The on-call group of the Scientific Service of the Zurich City and Cantonal Police immediately traveled to Lausanne on Tuesday evening to assist in the investigation. The officers are explosives experts. In Armenian circles in Switzerland, the bombings attributed to the organization 9th June have caused consternation and indignation. Persons close to the Paris-based Committee for the Defense of Armenian Concerns also condemn the attacks and consider them counterproductive. Doubts are even being expressed about Armenian authorship.
Tagesanzeiger Zürich, Wednesday, 22nd July 1980.
Armenian attacks against Switzerland.
Armenian organizations have carried out a series of attacks against Switzerland and Swiss institutions in recent years. 28 May 1976. The Turkish consulate and a Turkish bank in Zurich are devastated by bombs. 6 December 1978. A bomb package explodes in the Turkish consulate in Geneva. There is extensive damage to property. The new Armenian resistance identifies itself as the perpetrator. 22nd August 1979. An explosive device is thrown on a pedestrian walkway in Geneva. It is intended for a Turkish diplomat, but injures 2 Swiss nationals. The Secret Army for the Liberation of Armenia claims responsibility. 6th of February 1980. An unknown person shoots at the car of the Turkish ambassador in Bem. The ambassador is slightly injured. 18th of February 1980. Explosion at the Swissair offices in Rome. 3rd October 1980. A homemade bomb explodes in the hotel room of a young Armenian man and woman in Geneva. The man is seriously injured. 8th-9th October 1980, the Swiss Embassy and the Swiss Tourist Office in Beirut are damaged by a bomb from the 3rd October Organization. 12th October 1980, a bomb explodes in the Swiss Transport Office and in the Swissair branch in Paris. Further attacks on Swiss transport offices abroad follow on 13th of October 1980 in London, on 10th November 1980 in Rome, on 27th of January 1981 again in Rome. 4th February 1981, a bomb is discovered at the Swiss consulate in Los Angeles. 9th of June 1981, an employee of the Turkish consulate in Geneva is killed in the middle of the street by a Lebanese of Armenian origin. The Secret Army for the Liberation of Armenia claims responsibility for the crime. The assassin is remanded in custody in Geneva. 28th of June 1981, attack by the 9th June Organization against the Swissair offices in Tehran. 20th of July 1981, a bomb explodes in a rubbish bin at the Federal Palace in Bern. SDA.
Tagesanzeiger Zürich, Tuesday, 21st July 1980.
Bomb terror in Geneva Central Station, injured.
Geneva Cornavin, 22nd July. SDA-AP, bombs number 4 and 5 exploded at Geneva's main Cornavin railway station about an hour apart late on Wednesday afternoon. The explosive devices were placed in luggage lockers in a subway from Place Montbriand and Place Cornavin under tracks 2 and 3. A 22-year-old man was critically injured. A 17-year-old girl was seriously injured and 3 other persons were slightly injured. As in the 3 previous attacks, the Armenian underground organization 9th of June again claimed responsibility for the attacks to the French news agency AFP. The first bomb went off at 17:26. An hour later, at 18:35 HRs, there was a second explosion which, however, did not cause any further injuries. It was not yet clear on Wednesday evening whether the second detonation was due to another explosive device or the explosion of explosive luggage. The detonation pressure ripped away several doors, and an ensuing fire damaged the baggage locking system as well as some telephone booths. As is usual with explosives offenses, the Office of the Attorney General of Switzerland in Bern also became involved in the investigation in this case. The area around the station was cordoned off after the first detonation. Several ambulances immediately drove to the station. A man born in 1959 had been critically injured. On Wednesday evening, they were fighting for his life. His sister, born in 1964, suffered burns all over her body and was hit by several splinters. Another girl of the same age also suffered burns and broke a leg. These 3 persons were busy opening one of the lockers at the moment of the explosion. Furthermore, an American born in 1960 was injured by splinters to the chest, and a Japanese born in 1934 was stunned by the detonation blast. As late as Wednesday morning, the entire Geneva train station had been meticulously searched following an anonymous call. However, as was learned at the press conference of the Geneva authorities on Wednesday evening, nothing suspicious could be found. It is therefore assumed that the detonated explosive devices were deposited in the lockers after the search.
The 9th of June wants to continue the terror.
As late as Wednesday, the 9th June Organization had threatened to continue its attacks against Swiss institutions until the Armenian Martyros Jamkodijan, who had been arrested in Geneva on 9th of June and shot a Turk in the street, was released. A corresponding Beirut agency report was broadcast by Ticino Radio. Jamkodijan had been taken to an isolated cell and beaten with feet and guns by Swiss police, who were described as a gang of imperialism. Switzerland is the most sophisticated white weapon in the hands of imperialism and is no longer neutral, the message of the 9th June organization also says. In the federal parliament on Wednesday, it was stressed that the Federal Council had repeatedly refused to bow to blackmail threats. The series of bombs began on Sunday with an attack in front of the federal palace. There was only very minor damage to property. On Monday, an explosive device exploded at the Zurich-Kloten Airport railway station. 5 persons were slightly injured, and property damage of around 300,000 francs was caused. On Tuesday, several persons were injured, some seriously, when an explosive device went off in a Lausanne department stores. The Armenian underground organization 9th of June has claimed responsibility for all these attacks. In the meantime, the investigations continued at full speed without any success in the manhunt by Wednesday evening.
Tagesanzeiger, Zürich, Thursday, 23 Juli 1980.
Then Switzerland can expect a great deal. And I would like to say, however, that the entire population, and above all the government, are the ones who bear the greatest guilt if these things actually arrive. The indifference of the Swiss population and of the government makes such things possible, but so do the false legislation and the false humanitarianism.
That is absolutely correct. But this applies not only to Switzerland, but also to all countries of the earth where such occurrences can go into effect.
These things, however, are well known not only to us, but also to every thinking earth human who deals with the real facts.
That is clear. Nevertheless, these ones still do not want to recognize the truth.
That corresponds to the truth, but now let me mention those important things that will report themselves as world-moving in the future. These coming events are already known to you in some cases, but in certain parts, also only in a few details. Concerning Iran, the end of Khomeini is well known to you, which begins to be at hand with the fall of Bani Sadr.
Parliamentary candidate assassinated in Iran.
Beirut, 23 July. APDDP, a day before presidential elections scheduled for Friday. The domestic political scene in Iran continues to be overshadowed by assassinations of government supporters and executions of opponents of the mullah's regime. On Thursday, according to a report by Radio Tehran, Islamic cleric Saeed Hassan Beheshti and his nephew were assassinated in Isfahan. The 36-year-old Beheshti, a cousin of Ayatollah Mohammad Hussein Beheshti, the leader of the Islamic Republican Party CRP, who was killed in an explosive attack at Tehran party headquarters in late June, was an IRP candidate for the parliamentary by-elections. Bani Sadr calls for election boycott London, 23 July, Reuters. Ousted Iranian President Abul Hassan Bani Sadr has called for an election boycott on the eve of Iran's presidential election. The appeal, published on leaflets in London and elsewhere on Thursday, said the clergy-led regime had no other prospect than civil war.
Neue Zürcher. Zeitung Zürich, Thursday, 23 July 1981.
Iran faces civil war.
Tehran. Open fighting in the middle of the Iranian capital. Several dead and at least 40 injured were the result of clashes between Revolutionary Guards and members of the opposition People's Mujahideen yesterday. The Khomeini henchmen fired ruthlessly into a mass demonstration. The crowd protested, "It is the month of blood, of the fall of Khomeini."
Blick, Zurich, Friday, 31st July 1981.
Iran, 38 executions.
Tehran, 7th Aug AFP, 38 opposition figures were executed in Tehran on Friday in the biggest wave of executions since the ouster of President Bani Sadr a month and a half ago. A report by the official Pars news agency said the 38 counter-revolutionaries, had been arrested in several conspiratorial shelters. They allegedly threw grenades and Molotov cocktails and murdered innocent people. In total, 370 opponents of the Mullah dictatorship have been summarily shot since Bani Sadr's ouster.
Tagesanzeiger, Zürich, Saturday, 8th August 1989.
Iran, strike against the People's Mujahideen.
London, 20th August, Reuters AP. Iranian security forces launched a major new operation against leftist opposition figures on Thursday. A state radio report received in London said, Revolutionary Guards stormed a People's Mujahideen base in the morning. It was one of the most important command centers for coordinating terrorist and sabotage operations. According to the radio station, several guerrillas were arrested. The Iranian revolutionary regime on Wednesday again demanded that France extradite the Persian regime. Opponents who took control of a speedboat destined for Tehran but abandoned their piracy enterprise on Wednesday in the French naval port of Toulon Friday's TA. A Tehran Foreign Ministry statement said, although the end of this conspiracy is logically a victory for the Islamic Revolution, the government of Iran will not back down from its demand for the arrest and extradition of these pirates, just as it continues to insist on the arrest and extradition of criminals such as impeached President Bani Sadr and Rajavi, the leader of the People's Mujahideen allied with Bani Sadr.
Tagesanzeiger, Zürich, Friday, 21st August 1989.
The arising bomb assassination attempts, which I already explained to you and which will cause many close friends of the insane dictator to depart from this life, will actually constitute only the beginning of the irrevocable downfall. After the first attack in Tehran, in which the blood judge of Persia and many governing bodies will find death, there will soon follow a second, in which the lives of the president and one of his ministers will be taken away.
Iran, bomb kills politician.
30th August. A bomb attack on the seat of government of the Iranian Prime Minister kills 7 human beings, among them also President Mohammad Ali Rajahi and Prime Minister Mohammad Jawad Bahonar. The government in Tehran declares that the fifth column of the USA and the Iranian President Abul Hassan Banisadr, who was overthrown in June 1981, are responsible for the attack. After internal political disputes between the ruling Islamic Republican Party IRP and the left-wing opposition, Rajai had only taken over as president on 24th of July 1981 as successor to the deposed Banisadr, 21. 6. p. 101. This enabled the Islamic fundamentalists of the IRP to further expand their position of power in Iran. On 2 September 1981, Mohammad Reza Madawi Khani became the new prime minister, and Sayyid Ali Khamenei became president. However, Prime Minister Khani is replaced as head of government on 29 October 1981 by Mir Hossein Mousavi Khamenei, a hardline supporter of the conservative fundamentalist direction within the IRP. The bombing in Tehran is already the second major attack against important representatives of the IRP this year.
Chronik 1941, Chronik Verlag, Dortmund, Sunday, 30th August 1918.
Khomeini gathers his last followers around him.
Tehran, Iran's aged revolutionary leader Ayatollah Khomeini, 82, fears further assassinations against his dictatorial rule. The next target could be the parliament, Khomeini warned in a radio address yesterday. At the same time, he called on those in charge to only use security forces that can be trusted absolutely. Although the number of people he trusts is dwindling, Khomeini is also convinced that he can stay in power with his ultra-conservative Muslim leaders. Even the assassination of presidents will not stop our revolution, he declared to his new government earlier this week. The Sunday before last, a bomb attack on the seat of government in Tehran killed President Mohammad Ali Rajai, 48, and Prime Minister Javad Bahonar, 47. It was the heaviest blow to the rule of the religious mullahs since the 28th of June. At that time, 74 leading politicians were killed in an explosion at the headquarters of the ruling Islamic Republican Party. Among them was the notorious blood judge Ayatollah Beheshti, who had been earmarked as Khomeini's successor. Since the ousting of former president and army commander-in-chief Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, who has since fled to France in a hijacked military plane, senior representatives of the regime and Khomeini's confidants have been repeatedly killed by opposition underground fighters.
Blick Zürich, Wednesday, 9th September, 1981.
I have calculated once before that this man will be called President Ratsaj or something similar. Is that right?
Your calculation was inaccurate, though not completely. Anyhow, he will find death through another bomb attack. The political forms will change again through this, and new mass executions will reveal Persia's bloody way that will be dictated by the insane dictator Khomeini. The ensuing mass executions in Iran will no longer move into the first part of 1,000. Rather, they will move into the thousands, and children will no longer be spared, but will be shot on the open roads by the captors, who call themselves Revolutionary Guards.
Death sentences, blood toll of the revolution.
20th September. In Iran, 198 human beings are executed after the recent demonstrations by opposition members. 3 days later, students are murdered for the first time for political agitation in schools. Executions in Iran have continued to increase since the ouster of Iranian President Abul Hassan Bani Sadr on the 21st of June 1981. Above all, members of the oppositional left-wing Mujahideen-e Chalk are sentenced to death. A large proportion of those executed are executed without charge or trial, or directly after summary trials, usually without rights of defense or the possibility of appeal. The cause of the sharp increase in executions in Iran is the growing domestic power struggle between the ruling Islamic Republican Party IRP and its opponents, especially the Mujahideen-e Chalk, 21.6, PT 101, which mobilizes to fight the Iranian terror regime. At the end of the year, the international prisoner aid organization Amnesty International AI, which is actively engaged worldwide against human rights violations, the death penalty and torture of nonviolent political prisoners, announces that the number of those executed in Iran in 1981 is 2,619, 2,444 of them alone since Bani Sadr was deposed. Among those murdered are ministers and government officials, as well as numerous artists, women and children.
Chronik 1980. Chronik Verlag, Dortmund, Sunday, 20th September, 1980.
But this, in turn, will mean that already at this time, an underlying civil and fratricidal war will be broken out, which will find its origin and stirring up with Bani Sadr, who will call into being a resistance movement in France against Khomeini.
Crazy, because Bani Sadr, as you said, is designated by Khomeini himself as an ally, and with this, has also been in exile in France for the past few years.
That is correct, only this time, Bani Sadr will no longer be for Khomeini, but against him, whereby he will initiate everything in order to have him be murdered.
Then this should probably be the third assassination attempt?
Your question confuses me?
I mean that first, an assassination attempt on President Reagan will be carried out. Then, after that, there will be another on the Pope, after which then the third attempt should follow in the course of only a few months, if I am properly oriented.
You confuse the facts, because Khomeini's death does not take place in the period mentioned, as you know, because this event will only happen later.
Sorry, of course, I have confused things. But on whom is the third assassination attempt committed then?
I would have just said this if you had not interrupted me.
That was not my intention.
This assassination attempt will be committed on the President of Egypt during a military parade if the conditions for it do not change. Sadat will be attacked and even killed on Tuesday, the 6th of October, 1981, on the VIP platform of the Cairo Military Square of Abbasiyya by members of the army itself.
President Sadat assassinated attack during a parade of troops.
Cairo, 6th October DPA Reuter, Egyptian President Anwar as-Sadat was assassinated on Tuesday in an attack by members of an artillery unit. According to the presidential office, he died in a hospital a few hours after the assassination attempt. During a parade of troops marking the 8th anniversary of the 1973 Egyptian-Israeli War, several soldiers attacked the VIP box with hand grenades and machine guns, according to eyewitnesses.
Mubarak nominated as new president.
Cairo, 6th October DDP, Egypt's ruling National Democratic Party on Tuesday evening nominated Vice President Hosni Mubarak as its candidate for the election of the head of state, which must be held within the next 20 days. The Egyptian news agency MENA reported that the party's recently created Politburo unanimously passed a resolution to this effect.
Address by the Vice President.
Cairo, 6th October SDA-AAFP, President Sadat, the hero of war and peace, died a martyr on Tuesday. With these words, Vice President Hosni Mubarak announced the death of the Egyptian leader in the evening. In a televised address to the people, Mubarak highlighted Sadat's work for peace in the region. He expressed his conviction that the Egyptian people would follow the footsteps of Rais. Egypt would continue its quest for peace and honor all international treaties, so also the peace treaty with Israel, which Sadat had concluded. In accordance with the constitutional provisions, the Speaker of Parliament, Sufi Abu Taleb, will continue as head of state after Sadat's death, Mubarak also announced. As his first official act, Abu Taleb confirmed the vice president in his post. The elections to determine the new Egyptian head of state will be held within 60 days, as corresponds to the Constitution, Mubarak further announced. This period corresponds to the Egyptian Constitution.
State of emergency declared.
A state of emergency was declared throughout Egypt on Tuesday. This decision was made in the evening hours by the country's interim head of state, Sufi Abu Taleb. The duration of the state of emergency, which was imposed because of the death of President Sadat, is initially set at 1 year.
Satisfaction in Libya.
A report by the Libyan news agency Jana said Sadat had fallen victim to a revolutionary blow.
Neue Zürcher Zeitung, Zürich, Wednesday, 7th October, 1980.
President Sadat assassinated during military parade.
Cairo, 6th October, AP DDP BU. Egypt's President Anwar as-Sadat was killed in an assassination attempt on Tuesday. Vice President Hosni Mubarak told Egyptian radio on Tuesday evening that Sadat succumbed to serious injuries, received when several uniformed men fired and lobbed hand grenades at the VIP stand during a military parade in Cairo to commemorate Egypt's victories in the last war against Israel in 1973. During the parade, several uniformed men had suddenly jumped out of a jeep and fired shots from rapid-fire rifles at the VIP stand where Sadat was standing along with government members, Islamic and Christian clerics, and foreign diplomats. During his speech, which was broadcast 7 hours after the attack, Mubarak announced the imposition of a state of emergency for 1 year. He said that the foreign and domestic policies pursued by the assassinated president, who had died a martyr, would continue. The Cairo leadership would continue on the path of reconciliation with Israel and generally follow the ideals of the deceased. As Mubarak announced, Sadat's successor is to be elected within 60 days. Until then, the President of the People's Assembly will take over. Sufi Abu Taleb will take over the presidential duties. As his first official act, he confirmed Mubarak in office and at the same time appointed him commander-in-chief of the country's armed forces. Mubarak himself was nominated as the first candidate for the election of the head of state by the recently created Politburo of the ruling National Democratic Party later that evening. This decision was taken unanimously, the Egyptian news agency MENA reported. On Wednesday, Parliament is expected to follow this recommendation. Mubarak is considered a sure successor to Sadat.
Tagesanzeiger, Zürich, Wednesday, 7th October 1981.
There will be 10 to 12 deaths as a result of the attack to lament over. In addition, some assassins will die by the defense forces. Several diplomats and a church dignitary, who will likewise be on the very unsatisfactorily secured VIP platform, will not escape the attack and will be affected. The attack will be implemented by Egyptian soldiers who are members of the Army for the Freedom of Egypt movement and the Muslim Brotherhood, who will also stand in the pay of the Libyan and mad ruler Gaddafi. The actual origin of all of this, however, comes from Begin. The mighty one of Israel, Menachem Begin, will be the actual manipulator behind the assassination of Sadat, who will believe unto death that the powerful and insidious murderer is actually a good friend, but Begin truly is not such.
The Egyptian president was considered a guarantor for the peace process. In Israel, there is dismay over Sadat's death, by our correspondent Manfred Schroeder.
Tel Aviv, 6th Oct. The political establishment and public opinion in Israel reacted with dismay to the death of President Anwar as-Sadat. Despite the Israeli-Egyptian differences of opinion on the Palestinian question, Sadat was considered a guarantor for the continuation of the previous peace process, which began with his visit to Jerusalem in November 1977 and led to the conclusion of a peace treaty in 1979. However, the assassination also gives a boost to those extremist circles who want to prevent the last-minute evacuation of the Sinai Peninsula, which is due to take place in April. According to these circles, Israel must secure a strategic apron in the Sinai Peninsula for security reasons and at least keep the two military airfields beyond the borders, as well as the settlements in the Rafah sector in North Sinai. The leader of the radical right-wing Tehiyah Party, Professor Yuval Ne'eman, said after Sadat's assassination that the incident showed how unstable the situation in the neighboring country really was and how unreliable the peace agreement concluded at Camp David therefore was. The press spokesman of Prime Minister Menachem Begin, Uri Ben-Porat, however, spoke of a shock for the Israeli government. Prominent Palestinians, such as the former Jordanian Defense Minister Nusseibeh, said that although they were against Sadat's efforts to achieve autonomy for the occupied territories, they called the attack upsetting.
Sadat's death always feared in Israel.
In recent years, Israel has always feared Sadat's sudden death, from natural causes or an assassination, as a decisive threat to peace efforts so far. This concern had been voiced again and again in all political camps before and after the conclusion of the treaty with Egypt, since, in the Israeli view, the guidelines of Cairo's policy were essentially determined by Sadat alone. In view of the resistance in the Egyptian head of state's entourage to the normalization of relations with Israel, there could also be no confidence in Jerusalem in possible successors to the president. Moreover, decisive progress in interstate relations could only be achieved time and again through meetings between Jerusalem politicians and Sadat himself. Prime Minister Begin, however, had recently pointed out in a radio interview that beyond relations with Sadat, there was also a binding treaty. This was preceded by remarks by Chief of General Staff Eitan, according to which peace with Egypt would be endangered if Sadat were no longer at the head of his country. The government in Cairo reacted to this remark with great sensitivity and harsh diplomatic protests. Eitan was initially even disinvited from an agreed visit, until he had his office deny his statement. The retraction did not change the fact that he had expressed a widespread fear among Israelis.
Tagesanzeiger, Zürich, Wednesday, 7th October 1980.
Machine gun fire on the VIP tribune.
An independent organization for the liberation of Egypt claimed responsibility for the attack in a call to the Beirut office of the American news agency UPI. The attack also killed at least one of Sadat's bodyguards and one of his aides, and wounded Vice President Mubarak, Defense Minister General Abdelhalim Abu Ghasaleh, Chief of General Staff Abdel Rab El Nabi Hafiz, and several diplomats. According to our embassy in Cairo, Swiss citizens were not injured. According to eyewitnesses, American M60 tanks were rolling past the VIP stand in Heliopolis, while French and Soviet jet bombers were performing aerial acrobatics in the air, when suddenly several soldiers and an officer jumped out of a vehicle and threw 2 hand grenades at the stand. They then fired machine guns into the ranks of the guests of honor. The bodyguard, Fauzi Abdel Hafiz, immediately threw himself on the president to cover him with his body and was killed instantly. Other bodyguards returned fire and killed the 3 attacking soldiers. The officer was arrested. Sadat was taken to the military hospital in the Mahdi district with serious injuries, where any medical help was too late. At 1725, HR's Egyptian radio interrupted its broadcasts and broadcast military music and Quranic surahs. The cabinet met for a special session on Tuesday under the leadership of Vice President Hosni Mubarak, who was apparently only slightly injured. Parliament was convened for Wednesday at noon.
Tagesanzeiger, Zürich, Wednesday, 7th October 1989.
Wave of arrests in Egypt.
The government announced yesterday that numerous opponents of the regime had been arrested since the assassination of President Sadat. 18 officers have been released. The wave of arrests continues. In connection with the state of emergency, the authorities have announced harsh measures against the opposition. More than 100 persons are reported to have been killed in fighting in the upper Egyptian city of Asyut. In Cairo, there were shootings when armed groups attacked police stations.
Military aid from the USA.
Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Haig has promised Egypt accelerated military and economic aid. The Americans will conduct large maneuvers in Egypt this autumn. We need to show our presence and demonstrate that being an ally of the U.S. is not fatal, Haig said. Indignant reaction from Moscow. The U.S. was exerting crude pressure on Egypt and interfering in the country's internal affairs, the Kremlin protested. The U.S. magazine Newsweek reported yesterday on Egyptian-American plans in case of a Libyan attack on Sudan. An Egyptian invasion of Libya is also being considered, Newsweek reported.
Blick, Zurich, Tuesday, 13th October 1981.
Gas they were only lone perpetrators.
Cairo, 12th Oct. AP, the assassins arrested after the murder of Egyptian President Sadat will soon be tried by a military court, according to Defense Minister Abdel Halem Abu Ghasaleh. Ghazala said in an interview with the Associated Press that he expected the investigation to be completed in 4 or 5 days, followed by a public trial that would end with the death sentence for the main accused. The leader of the group, Khalid Ahmed Shawki al-Islambuli, does not deserve to find death by firing squad, the minister added. He would personally work to ensure that al-Islambuli was publicly hanged. Contrary to earlier official Egyptian accounts, which had said that one of the 4 assassins was shot dead in a shootout with security forces immediately following Sadat's murder, Ghazala said on Monday that all 4 had been arrested, one of them only after a 5-hour chase. The injured Islambuli had awoken from unconsciousness in the morning and had given detailed information on the course of events and the background of the assassination. Islambuli, a lieutenant in the artillery, stated that he had given 3 of his subordinates special leave before the military parade and had smuggled his 3 accomplices into the parade in their place. Islambuli allegedly gave as one of the motives for the crime the fact that his brother was among the 1,500 Islamic extremists and other opponents of the Egyptian government arrested last month on Sadat's orders. However, the main reason the artillery lieutenant gave was that he and his co-conspirators were against Sadat because he did not govern the country according to Islamic principles. The investigation was still ongoing, but he did not believe that there were any traces of the assassins leading to an internal Egyptian opposition group or abroad. It is therefore highly probable that the killers were lone perpetrators.
Tagesanzeiger, Zürich, Tuesday, 13th October 1980.
Sadat is already too focused now on honest peace for Begin, and also is not unrelenting enough for Begin's sense. So this one will have him assassinated by secret agents whom he has bought, who can work towards this undetected in the ranks of Gaddafi, as well as of the Muslim Brotherhood and the Freedom Army. Gaddafi, who is stupid, and the Muslim Brotherhood and the Freedom Army are by no means clever enough to know that secret agents, purchased by Begin, already exist now and have already existed for a long time in their own ranks and carry out their mischief directed by Begin. Begin, who is a man full of meanness, falsehood, lies, intrigue, and murderous thoughts, must have the Egyptian president be assassinated because this one does not fit into his criminal country domination plans. Sadat, however, is still very focused and unrelenting in his blind confidence, so Begin hopes that a non-goal-oriented man will become Sadat's successor when he allows his assassination.
Can also nothing be done to prevent all this?
An attempt with a visit would be exceptionally permitted to you if you want to do this. However, you cannot change anything, so be aware of this. It is always difficult for you to remain silent and to wait passively, I know. But do not be disappointed.
I will write a letter to Sadat to warn him. I just hope, then, that he also receives it.
For that, I will endeavor myself and ask Quetzal for his help, because from next spring I will be absent for some time. Your visit to Sadat, however, should not take place any earlier than what is good for your safety. The 28th of July, 1981 would be suitable for this purpose, and your visit could be carried out unhindered. I calculated this date in foresight because I know your reactions very well and wanted to present this proposal to you anyways. You can then talk to the president for some time, so you do not need a letter. Quetzal will be responsible for the fact that you can talk to the president for about 20 minutes undisturbed and unseen. Be aware, however, that your visit to Sadat can have major consequences, for he will try to stop the unstoppable by carrying out a large-scale wave of arrests among his reachable enemies. This will occur as a result of your explanations that you will give him.
That would be very good. The assassins would then be captured before they could strike.
You are illogical because what has to happen will happen. With the coming events, nothing is to change.
Nevertheless, I would like to try this.
You know that this is impossible, but you actually must learn this yet another time, even though you know the unavoidable and unchangeable truth. You are sometimes very strange in these things, even though you know much.
The current background: the mass arrests in Egypt. Sadat sees Egypt's stability at risk.
In recent months, Egyptian President Anwar al-Sadat has become increasingly strident and angry in his speeches against the opposition, against the extremists among the Muslims and the Coptic Christians who wanted to sow discord in his great Egyptian family, against the Moscow-controlled leftists who maliciously criticized his economic policy, against the fundamentalist Muslim Brothers and their followers who, together with the left, opposed his Israel policy, and against Egypt's increasing political and economic dependence on the capitalist West, against rebellious journalists, lawyers, professors, and students. At some point, it was clear to every observer of the Egyptian domestic political scene, which was seething more and more in the underground, Sadat's big sweeping blow had to come if he did not want to endanger his own regime.
553 prominent arrested.
On Thursday night Friday's TA, the Egyptian security police had their meticulously planned large-scale operation. On the line were 553 arrested, including 4 bishops, 3 archpriests and half a dozen priests of the Coptic Christian Church, 6 prominent Islamic clerics and more than a dozen Islamic officials, the political management of the Opposition Workers' Party, and the Marxist Progressive Unionist Rally Party, plus the chief editors of the 2 party organs, the spiritual and political leader of the well-organized and influential fundamentalist Islamic Muslim Brotherhood, Sheikh Omar Telmisani, the still widely respected former Secretary General of the defunct conservative National Waft Party, Siraj ad-Din Pasha, along with several prominent Wafdists, as well as prominent lawyers and journalists. The official reason for this mass arrest, which is unprecedented in Sadat's 10 years in office and reminds many Egyptians of the years under Nasser, was the bloody riots between Muslims and Coptic Christians in Cairo at the end of June this year, in which 14 people were killed and around 60 wounded. All those arrested are summarily accused of directly or indirectly fueling the sectarian strife or exploiting it for their own purposes and goals, and of endangering the safety of the population. The extent to which these charges can be sustained against those now arrested will depend not least on the artistry of the Socialist Attorney General Abdul Qadir Ahmed Ali, who is leading the investigation. The fact is that the conflicts between zealots among the Coptic Christians and the Sunni Muslims, which have been increasing in number and becoming more and more radical for several years, endanger the internal stability of the country and also the existence of the regime, more than the largely controlled political opposition from the left and the right. With about 6 to 8 million, the Copts are a minority in the 43 million-strong Sunni Egyptian population. However, they form the largest Christian minority in the entire Near and Middle East. Until now, the coexistence of Copts and Muslims in Egypt has been largely problem-free, apart from local and mostly private conflicts. This changed with the Islamic Renaissance emanating from Iran, which also became increasingly noticeable in Egypt and strengthened above all the Muslim Brotherhood and its follower organizations. Extremists on both sides intensified their agitation. Islamic societies were formed at the universities, which organized themselves tightly under the guise of social work, carried out political and religious enlightenment, and agitated equally against Sadat's Israel policy and against the Coptic Church. Militant Copts in turn founded an armed underground organization, the Soldiers of Christ. Coptic immigrants in America and Lebanon published papers accusing the Egyptian authorities of persecuting the Copts. incidents became more and more frequent. In order not to let Lebanese conditions set in, Sadat had to do something. His punitive judgment hit Copts and Muslims at the same time. Sadat does not tolerate criticism. The fact that he simultaneously decimated the political opposition is probably only partly explained by the fact that opposition elements occasionally exploited the sectarian tensions for their own purposes. The other part of the truth is that Sadat, as an opposition politician once said, cannot tolerate opposition and equates personal criticism with treason. The almost messianic appeal that Sadat feels inevitably makes him see critics as malicious ignoramuses or even traitors. Now 553 religious extremists, wire pullers, political opponents, and opposition journalists are behind bars awaiting trial. The question of how the population will react to this mass arrest remains open. Many of those arrested have a following among the masses that numbers in the hundreds of thousands. Sadat himself will tell his Egyptian family how to proceed on Saturday, when he will explain to Parliament the draconian measures he intends to take against the enemies of this family.
Karl Buchhaller, Kairo Tagesanzeiger, Zürich, Tuesday, 8 September 1980.
I know, because for me, everything indeed goes too much to the kidneys. To know the future is damn hard, especially when one must remain silent about it. And besides this, damn it, I kind of like Sadat, and therefore I feel quite windy and dishonest.
Sure, but there is nothing to change in this, unfortunately.
Egypt. Arrest of more than 1,500 fundamentalists, and Copts Shenouda banished to a desert monastery Cairo. The 7th of September Reuters, after Egypt's President Anwar Sadat withdrew his state credentials, the head of the Coptic Christians, Patriarch Shenouda III, has been exiled to a remote monastery TA of Monday. The organ of Sadat's ruling National Democratic Party, Mayo, reports in its Monday edition that Patriarch Shenouda has been ordered to go to the Bishoy Monastery in the Wadi Natron. At the same time, he was forbidden to travel to Cairo and Alexandria. For reasons of state security, and because of the reputation of the church, he was also forbidden to attend meetings of the congregation. By our correspondent Karl Buchhaller.
Cairo, 7th Sept. The head of the Christian Coptic Church in Egypt, Patriarch Shenouda III, officially called Pope by the Copts, has been banished to a desert monastery by President Sadat. The Patriarch had been deposed as spiritual leader of the Coptic Church by Sadat at the weekend in the course of a government action against sectarian extremists by presidential decree and replaced by a council of 5 Coptic bishops appointed by Sadat TA of Monday, as reported on Monday by Mayo. The official organ of the Sadat-led state-supporting National Democratic Party NDP reported Sadat has forbidden the 59-year-old patriarch to leave the Bishoy Monastery in Wadi Natron, north of Cairo, where Shenouda had retired to pray and meditate shortly before the start of the punitive campaign against Islamic and Coptic extremists, in the course of which more than 1,500 people have been arrested so far. According to the report, Shenouda, who holds the title Patriarch of Alexandria and Africa, is also banned from visiting Alexandria and Cairo. Cairo is the seat of the Coptic Church's leadership and the Patriarchate. At the same time, the Patriarch had been banned from appearing before large crowds of believers. According to the paper, these measures have been taken in the interest of the security of the people. Patriarch Shenouda had become a political leader over the years and declared war on the state. As spokesman for the Coptic Church, Bishop Samuel, who is himself a member of the 5-member council appointed by Sadat, had declared on Sunday that the Coptic Church continued to regard Pope Shenouda as the spiritual and ecclesiastical head, but at the same time also accepted the 5-member council appointed by Sadat. Bishop Samuel described the measures ordered by Sadat to secure national unity as important for Egypt's unity and security.
Sadat wants to enforce separation of state and religion.
The Cairo Press continued on Monday to publish the names of more than 1,500 people arrested, among them prominent Coptic clerics, Islamic preachers, opposition politicians, lawyers, journalists, professors, and students. According to reports in the official Cairo Press on Monday, the catalog of measures announced by Sadat to ensure the confessional unity of the people and to enforce the separation of politics and religion is to be expanded. In future, all preachers in mosques would have to show a preacher's license issued by the Egyptian Ministry of Religion. In addition, all mosques in which the now banned Islamic societies and organizations operate are to be placed under the supervision of the Ministry of Religion. The mosques that were not built with state funds but with private funds are also to be taken over by the state. Despite the purges of the last few days, the atmosphere in Cairo also remained calm on Monday, apart from increased police deployments. There is no word in Cairo on the situation in the provinces. Preparations were made by the government agencies on Monday for the referendum in which the Egyptian people are to give their retrospective approval on Thursday to Sadat's measures to secure national unity, which already came into force at the weekend.
Tagesanzeiger, Zürich, Tuesday, 8th September 1960.
I know, and that is probably how it will stay, because the people on Earth will hardly change so quickly and accept the truth that changes could still be invoked, for the better, I mean.
While you are not permitted to speak about it at this point so as to endanger the success, it is still advisable that great efforts be made to change various future incidents for the positive, although they seem to be inevitable now. Toward the latter part of 1983 or spring of 1984, we are planning to introduce an effective peace meditation to benefit Earth, its inhabitants, and events that will occur there. Included in this effort will be everyone on ERA and many members from our Federation, who total will comprise more than 3.5 billion, 3,500,000 humans. This will produce an extremely powerful energy force through which the terrestrials and their actions, hence their occurrences, should be influenced and political confusion resolved. These efforts will also lead to freeing Russia and other countries from their current dictatorship status. The procedures have been instituted and mandated by the High Council, who have found a permissible method to intervene using a particular cosmic clause that could be used to influence terrestrial affairs. As part of the result brought about by these peace efforts, the inhumane wall will fall, which currently divides Germany into two separate countries. Thus, the two sectors will be reunited into one.
Relaxed firing order at the GDR wall.
Washington, Berlin. The GDR wants to humanize controls at its borders with the West, according to its state and party leader Erich Honecker. In an interview with the Washington Post published on Sunday, Honecker rejected U.S. President George Bush's call for the demolition of the Berlin Wall, but stressed that the border guards' order to shoot had been relaxed. They had been ordered not to kill citizens who tried to flee to the Federal Republic or to West Berlin. According to information from East Berlin church circles, GDR security forces in Leipzig arrested about 60 persons on Saturday. By Sunday, nothing was known about the fate of those detained. The security forces reportedly intervened at a street festival in the city center called for by human rights and peace groups. Reuters AP.
Tagesanzeiger, Zürich, Tuesday, 12th June 1981.
Every group member is asked to help, for the strength and initiative of each and every last one is imperative, as is the assistance of other humans on Earth who will voluntarily join you in this effort. In this regard, you are only permitted to speak about the peace meditation and its purpose in the peace effort. You may not mention the issues I previously told you about and which I specifically named just now. Should you not adhere to these instructions and speak about these items, you will not only jeopardize all efforts in this direction, but the anticipated successes commencing in 1987 will not occur either. They may even transform into something negative.
Reunification as a topic.
In view of the difficult domestic political situation in the Soviet Union, the program of the visit was not so strict, DPA, Reuters, AFP. According to information from West German government circles, the Soviet head of state and party leader Gorbachev will have a comparatively tight program during his 4-day visit. Because of the tense domestic political situation in the USSR, the Kremlin leader has agreed to a loose schedule. Gorbachev is expected in Bonn on Monday. The highlight of the visit, which is scheduled from the 12th to the 15th of June, is likely to be the signing of a declaration on the perspectives of German-Soviet cooperation and more than 10 bilateral agreements scheduled for Tuesday. Helicopter flights from appointment to appointment will be dispensed with altogether because Gorbachev, like Leonid Brezhnev before him, is said to have an aversion to this kind of travel. Instead, he will travel in the federal state of North Rhine-Westphalia, for example, on a prototype of the latest West German express train.
Gorbachev wants to stay in close contact with Moscow.
Gorbachev will not stay in the guest house of the West German government, Schloss Gimnisch, but in the Soviet embassy at Stadtwald in Bad Godesberg. The program schedule includes blocks of time both in the morning and before evening appointments, which will give him constant opportunities to maintain contact with Moscow during his stay in Bonn. The head of state apparently wants to stay in constant contact with Moscow because of the difficult domestic political situation in the Soviet Union. A concert of German and Soviet artists on Wednesday evening was dropped. In consideration of the serious train accident in the USSR with several hundred dead, the Soviet side had asked that it be removed from the program. It is limited to a visit to the Beethoven House in Bonn, a wreath-laying ceremony at the Soviet military cemetery Stukenbrock near Paderborn, where 55,000 Soviet prisoners of war are buried, and a conversation with a German family in Stuttgart. A visit to Salamander Werke in Kornwestheim, which operates 2 joint ventures in the USSR, was cancelled. Instead, Mrs.
Bilateral cooperation to be strengthened.
The political highlight of the state visit will be next Tuesday. In a meeting of both delegations, about a dozen agreements and treaties, as well as a declaration of principles on German-Soviet relations, are to be signed. According to government sources, this is a very substantial document with statements and perspectives on bilateral relations as well as the international significance of the cooperation between the two countries. The divided city of Berlin is assured that it will participate in the development of German-Soviet relations on the basis of the Four-Power Agreement.
Kohl, reunification to be discussed.
Chancellor Helmut Kohl also wants to raise the issue of German reunification in his conversations with the Kremlin leader. According to the head of government in a newspaper interview, he had already touched on this issue during his visit to Moscow in October last year. Meanwhile, a high-ranking advance delegation arrived in the West German capital, including the Soviet chief of protocol. Among other things, it concerns the private invitation of the Chancellor and his wife Hannelore to Mikhail and Raisa Gorbachev on Wednesday evening. Gorbachev had already visited the FRG in May 1975. In contrast to his then superior Leonid Brezhnev, he remained largely unnoticed. He was only a guest of the West German communists who were practically insignificant in elections.
Der Zürcher Oberländer, Wetzikon, Monday, 12th June 1989.
What a thought. Of course, I will sit on my mouth. But do you actually think that the dictatorships on Earth will come to an end in the next decade? And that the wall in the DDR, German Democratic Republic, will come down?
This is as good as certain, although World War III will still be a threat, in addition to many other forms of tragedies. Success will follow as long as we conscientiously and systematically perform the peace meditation. Beginning with 1987, many other things will change, for the positive that is.
Hungary opens the floodgates. All GDR refugees allowed to leave Budapest has temporarily suspended agreement with the GDR since midnight. The borders between Hungary and Austria have been open for the GDR refugees who have been waiting in Hungary to leave for the West. Departure is not only possible in convoys, but also individually. Private cars can also be used. On Sunday, Federal Foreign Minister Genscher thanked Hungary for its willingness to help and called the permission to leave an act of humanity and proof of the new thinking based on the Helsinki Final Act. By Astrid Freffel, Vienna.
In a communiqué on Sunday, the government in Budapest announced, "Any GDR citizen residing in Hungary may leave the country from midnight onwards in the direction of his desired destination on condition that the authorities of the receiving country take him in." The official Hungarian news agency MTI further reported that Hungary has temporarily suspended the 1969 agreement with the GDR, which prohibits either country from allowing citizens of the other to leave for the West if they do not have valid exit papers. In an interview with Hungarian television this evening, Foreign Minister Gyula Horn announced his government's decision to allow all GDR citizens willing to flee the country to leave in an orderly manner and without restrictions. Horn also announced that there are currently about 60,000 East Germans in Hungary, almost all of whom are expected to leave. Until now, aid agencies had assumed a number of around 7,000 refugees. In anticipation of the mass exodus, the flow of GDR citizens to Hungary continued to increase over the weekend. Departure is possible not only to Austria, but also to Yugoslavia. Horn further confirmed that no agreement had been reached in the conversations between the FRG and the GDR, and that what was happening now was a unilateral, even solitary decision by Hungary. Hungary has thus chosen a way out of the refugee problem, which has been going on for weeks, without the agreement of its ally, the GDR. After the difficulties with the CSSR and Romania, Budapest is now also risking problems with the GDR. Extensive preparations have been made for the arriving refugees in Austria and southern Germany in recent days and weeks. Technical problems and problems with accommodation are therefore not expected. Austria also temporarily lifted the visa requirement for GDR citizens a few days ago. Federal Chancellor Helmut Kohl called on German citizens to help the GDR refugees find work and housing. GDR attacks Hungary sharply. East Berlin. The GDR has attacked Hungary waiver permission for GDR refugees to leave the country in extremely sharp terms. In a communiqué distributed on Sunday evening by the official news agency ADN, Budapest is accused of violating international treaties and of direct interference in the internal affairs of the GDR. GDR citizens staying in Hungary were illegally allowed to leave the country for the FRG, in violation of international treaties and agreements, in a cloak-and-dagger operation across the border with Austria. Here, under the pretext of humanitarian considerations, organized human trafficking was being carried out. AP!
Tagesanzeiger Zürich, 11th July 1909.
Facing a mass exodus from the GDR. By our Germany correspondent Franz Vergeier, Bonn.
The German government has now pulled the emergency brake and closed the door of its hourly representation in East Berlin to GDR visitors until further notice. For days now, 130 mostly young GDR citizens have been in the building, trying to force their way out to the west. The situation in the German embassy in Budapest is even more precarious. Hundreds have gathered in and in front of the building in the hope of receiving help to continue their journey to West Germany. Quite a few risk health and imprisonment trying to cross the supposedly open Hungarian-Austrian border illegally. One is involuntarily reminded of the situation before the wall was built in Berlin in August 1961, when tens of thousands tied up a small bundle and, as it were, turned their backs on the communist dictatorship forever by voting with their feet. 100,000 GDR citizens leaving this year? In view of the refusal of today's GDR rulers, who built the wall back then to allow social change and democratic reforms in their state as well, many young human beings no longer see any prospects for themselves and are looking for the way west. This year, almost 50,000 have already come, and another 50,000 are expected, knowing full well that they can by no means expect paradise in the Federal Republic. The influx of people wanting to leave the country, which was not provoked by Bonn, has put a strain on relations within Germany and also on relations with Hungary. The reform communists in Budapest are quite surprisingly confronted with the reality that one German state gives all Germans the right to freely choose their place of residence, while the other, the GDR, generally does not grant this freedom of movement to human beings in its sovereign territory. A fair solution that would also enable the Hungarian government to save face both to the east and to the west is not yet in sight.
Consequential stamp after failed escape attempt in Hungary.
Bonn is trying secret diplomacy and appeals to GDR citizens against rash steps. Anyone who seeks out the diplomatic representations of the Federal Republic in East Berlin, Prague and Budapest with the intention of escaping or is caught crossing the Austro-Hungarian border without permission still risks long prison sentences. Hungary has always been the most popular holiday destination for GDR residents. Since the political situation there has changed, many a person who had no chance of moving legally to the West in the GDR sees a new opportunity to escape from the unloved country. But laws from the Cold War era still apply in Hungary. When GDR citizens receive a Federal Republic passport at the Federal Republic's representation, to which they are undoubtedly entitled, it does not contain a Hungarian entry visa, so formally speaking, the passport holder cannot leave the country.
Financial pressure from Bonn on Budapest.
Behind the scenes, intensive efforts are therefore underway, combined with offers of financial assistance, to induce the foreigners' authorities in Budapest to dispense with the incriminating stamps in future, or to grant the GDR citizens willing to leave the country the status of political refugees. This would be a unique procedure in the communist sphere of power and would certainly not remain without Soviet reaction. A travel ban on East Berlin for GDR citizens, on the other hand, would affect Hungary less. In East Berlin, the aim is to persuade the GDR authorities to grant exemption from punishment to the human beings now in the Bonn representation and to allow them to leave for the Federal Republic after a certain period of time.
Der Zürcher Oberländer, Wetzikon, 9th August 1981.
GDR citizens leave Bonn mission.
All 116 GDR citizens who had been trying to force their way out to the West for more than a month at the permanent representation of the Federal Republic in East Berlin left the mission voluntarily on Friday. At the same time, a solution for the more than 6,000 GDR citizens waiting to leave the country is also emerging in Budapest. East Berlin, Budapest. The GDR citizens in the permanent representation in East Berlin were assured of exemption from punishment and care by the lawyer and confidant of GDR State Chairman Erich Honecker, Wolfgang Vogel. Bonn expressed the expectation that the GDR would fulfill its promise to find a humanitarian solution for the human beings. The Bonn mission had been closed to the public on the 8th of August due to the rush of people wanting to leave the country, as an orderly workflow was no longer possible. Now that the tug-of-war in East Berlin has come to an end, a solution is also in sight for the thousands of GDR refugees holding out in Hungary. According to official Hungarian statements, the departure of the more than 6,000 GDR citizens waiting in Hungary can be expected very soon. The head of the Hungarian Socialist Workers' Party, Rezső Nérs, affirmed in Budapest that the outstanding problems could be solved in a really short time. However, he could not say whether it would be in 2 or 3 days or in the coming week. On the other hand, the situation of GDR citizens hoping to leave the country remained unchanged at the Bonn embassies in Warsaw and Prague also on Friday. The number of those who preferred to flee across the Green Border to Austria increased from Thursday to Friday. About 100 persons, mostly GDR citizens, managed to escape during the night. GDR citizens caught by the Hungarian border guards reported in Budapest that they had been threatened by the Hungarian authorities with expulsion to Czechoslovakia if they were caught again. AP.
Tagesanzeiger, Zürich, 23 August 1989.
The Allied command leaves Berlin.
Atrashukantada. One day before German unification, the Allied command in Berlin ended its work on Tuesday. Governing Mayor Walter Momper bid farewell to the generals of the 3 Western powers who held the function of city commanders until midnight on Tuesday, and awarded them the Berlin Order of Merit in gratitude for the city's freedom. The 2 city governments in East and West prepared for the end of Berlin's status and the assumption of full sovereignty on Wednesday with a joint declaration on unity. Momper emphasized in a ceremony before Allied officers and diplomats in the Philharmonie that no one had forgotten the atrocities of the Nazi regime, especially Germany's neighbors. Nevertheless, they had not opposed German unity, they had even promoted it. This attitude shows greatness and trust, which Germans must recognize. Germans were aware that they had to assume more responsibility in the international sphere as part of their integration in Europe.
Der Zürcher Oberländer, Wetzikon, 3 Oktober 1989.
New mass escape from the GDR.
In a renewed mass flight, about 200 GDR citizens crossed the Hungarian-Austrian border into the West on Tuesday evening. The night before, a GDR refugee had been accidentally shot by a Hungarian border guard during a scuffle. In view of the continuing flow of refugees, West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl called on the GDR leadership to reform and respect the CSCE agreements. Bonn, Vienna, Budapest. According to eyewitnesses, about 200 refugees drove by car into the border area near Klingenbach later on Tuesday evening. Near the border, they left the vehicles and ran across the open border. Hungarian border guards had only taken up position immediately afterwards. Together with these refugees, some 500 GDR citizens succeeded in escaping to Austria on Tuesday alone. Hungarian authorities reported on Tuesday that since the beginning of this year, Hungarian border guards had detained 7,000 GDR citizens crossing the border illegally. During a scuffle between GDR refugees and Hungarian border guards on Tuesday night, a GDR citizen was killed by a Hungarian border guard. The incident, which allegedly occurred on Austrian territory, is to be investigated by Hungarian and Austrian authorities. Speaking to the press in Bonn, West German Chancellor Kohl said he was prepared to meet with GDR State Council Chairman Honecker if far-reaching and lasting relief for the human beings could be achieved. Bonn would try everything to help the refugees in the West German missions in Eastern Europe as quickly as possible. The Federal Republic did not want any confrontation. However, the German Chancellor urged the GDR leadership to fulfill its obligations under the CSCE agreements and to grant its citizens freedom of movement. The GDR should not close its mind to the reform course of other Eastern European states. On Tuesday evening, the GDR criticized Kohl's statements as interference in its internal affairs. After the permanent mission in East Berlin and the embassy in Budapest, the mission in Czechoslovakia must also be closed as of Wednesday. Reuter DPA-SDA.
Tagesanzeiger, Zürich, 23rd August 1981.
The Adventure of German Unification GDR, a state disappears.
By Reuter correspondent Volker Warkentin, Pictures. Keystone Karl Marx was right after all. When socialism has come to an end, the founder of communism taught, then the state dies. And indeed, already the acting head of state, Sabine Bergmann-Pohl, has said goodbye to the ambassadors accredited in East Berlin. The army no longer belongs to the Warsaw Pact. Today, on the 3rd of October, the German Democratic Republic ceases to exist altogether. This is not what the philosopher from Trier had in mind. Of course, because the socialist fatherland of the GDR will not be replaced by communism and the empire of freedom dreamed of by Marx, but by capitalism in the form of the social market economy and another state. The Federal Republic of Germany will be richer today by 5 new countries and a good 16 million human beings, see yesterday's ZO. If one wanted to place an obituary for the GDR, the text could perhaps read, "She died after more than 40 years of serious illness on the 3rd of October 1990. We ask you to refrain from expressions of sympathy. But the vast majority of the 16 million human beings between the Baltic Sea and the Thuringian Forest do not seem to shed a tear for the state once idolized by SED propaganda. After all, they decided its end with the mass demonstrations of autumn 1989 and with the ballot paper.
Mixed feelings instead of great jubilation.
At the same time, there is also no great mood of jubilation, neither in Berlin nor in Leipzig, Rostock, or Suhl. For the masses of human beings are mainly depressed by the fear of unemployment, which seems inevitable as a consequence of the far-reaching restructuring of the economy. Unemployment, social insecurity, price increases, and crime were indeed words that GDR citizens only knew from West German television a year ago and did not experience firsthand. Conversely, this also applies to the great frankness in public debates, which was still commonplace in churches in October 1989. The People's Chamber, in the days of the SED regime a yawningly boring event with unanimity, was, on the other hand, characterized by great liveliness since the fall of communism, even if its sessions also threatened to descend into chaos from time to time.
GDR stamp as a gag.
It was also the House of Representatives that abolished the national coat of arms long before the decision was made on the day of death. The hammer and compass in the ear wreath were quickly removed from all public buildings. They were only retained in the stamps, reason enough for many couples to tie the knot before the 3rd of October for the sake of the gag. And the national anthem, whose melody sounds a bit like the Hans Albers hit Goodbye Johnny, was last played so extensively at the European Athletics Championships in Split in August, where border guards once shot at refugees like rabbits. Small-scale trade in GDR devotional objects flourishes today in Berlin. Along the former wall, traders offer Splittist flags, medals, badges of honor, and uniform parts. But the once outsized state authority has also disappeared. The administration of justice is almost at a standstill. There are still large complaints from citizens that the police intervene too late or not at all when neo-Nazis hunt down foreigners in the streets of East German cities.
Scenes unthinkable a short time ago.
Also unthinkable a year ago would have been the scenes currently unfolding on prison rooftops across the country. Protesting prisoners are demanding an amnesty from the dying state and threatening mass suicide. The state, the acting justice minister declares, must not allow itself to be blackmailed. But the police are not sent into the prisons to suppress the revolt, as would have been the case in 1989. Taking over the FRG state structure, is the GDR legacy underestimated? The new German state will adopt the structures of the Federal Republic of Germany. The federal structure, with 11 federal states so far, will be enlarged by the accession of the GDR to 16 regions with far-reaching competences. Berlin will be the capital again, but the government will remain in Bonn for years. Germany's population will grow to around 79 million. However, the 16 million former East Germans bring with them a legacy that should not be underestimated. 40 years of communism, dictatorship, planned economy, and Stasi. They lack the experience to survive in a competitive society.
Der Zürcher Oberländer, Wetzikon, Wednesday, 3rd October, 1989.
Germany is reunited.
SDA DPH AP. The 78 million Germans geared up for a long night on Tuesday to celebrate unification with joyous rallies after 45 years of division. Hundreds of thousands of human beings flocked to Berlin, the central venue for state ceremonies and celebrations. Chancellor Helmut Kohl said in a televised speech that a dream was becoming reality for the Germans. The old capital Berlin kicked off the celebrations on Tuesday. The city governments of West and East Berlin adopted a declaration on the restoration of Berlin unity. The three Western city commanders dissolved the Allied command in West Berlin and said goodbye. In East Berlin, the former capital of the GDR, the East German Volkskammer convened for its last session.
Kohl, the united Europe is our future.
In an address over radio and television, Chancellor Kohl appealed to all Germans to show solidarity. We must overcome a way of thinking that still divides Germany into a Huben and a Druben, he said. Kohl stressed that the conditions for solving the economic consequences of unification were excellent. Kohl explained that the Germans had learned from history and were a peace and freedom-loving people. For them, love of country, love of freedom, and the spirit of good neighborliness belong together. We want to be reliable partners. We want to be good friends. There is only one place for us in the world, at the side of free peoples.
Farewell of the Allies.
The city commanders of France, Great Britain, and the USA met in the Allied Command building in Berlin-Dahlem for their last session. Afterwards, they said goodbye in the Schöneberg City Hall. In a letter to the governing mayor, Walter Momper, they declared that they were relinquishing their sovereign rights at the time of German unification. Momper thanked the Allies, without whose protection Berlin would not have been able to play its role as a bridge in a torn Germany. Thousands of Berliners celebrate Festival of Unity. With a huge public festival, countless old and new citizens of Germany celebrated German unity on Tuesday evening, for the most part, peacefully. While the police counted more than 10,000 human beings around the Brandenburg Gate alone at the beginning of the Festival of Unity, who gathered around stalls, stands and stages in a cheerful mood, protesters in front of the East Berlin Schauspielhaus Theater welcomed the guests of the Act of State with a concert of whistles and colorful ceremonies. During a counter-demonstration in Kreuzberg, a policeman was stabbed in the arm.
Tearing down the wall in people's minds.
In Berlin, governing Mayor Walter Momper and Mayor Tino Schwerzina called on the human beings in the reunited city to approach each other with confidence and to be a model for the rest of Germany in growing together. Getting used to each other will not be easy after 40 years of imposed division, the two social democratic city leaders admitted in radio addresses. After the Wall of Stone, the walls in some people's minds still have to be taken down, Schwerzina warned. Momper said, "The more we meet each other with openness and sympathy and the more we show solidarity among ourselves, the easier it will become."
Der Zürcher Oberländer, Wetzikon, Wednesday, 3rd October 1989.
Dancing for joy on the top of the wall.
On 10th November. All of Berlin is beside itself. The world no longer seems the same as it did just a few hours ago. At the Bornholmer Strasse border crossing, the unimaginable happens. To the cheers of thousands, one of the barriers that separated East and West Berlin for 28 years is lifted. The joy on both sides of the wall knows no bounds. Complete strangers, human beings, fall into each other's arms. Only the hardy can hold back tears on this clear autumn night. A young man shouts, "Is this a fairy tale?" This is probably the beginning of freedom and almost too good to be true. That night, Berlin does not go to sleep. The whole city is on its feet. Folk festival scenes take place at the wall and in the streets. Pub owners buy local rounds. With the Russian sparkling wine of the Aussies and the French champagne of the Wessies, the people of Spree Athens toast the night of the century.
Chronik 1989. Chronik Verlag. Dortmund, 9th to 10th November 1999.
The 9th of November, 1989. After 28 years, the wall falls. Private travel to foreign countries can be applied for without preconditions. With this rather casual statement by the Berlin SED leader Günter Schabowski. A new era dawns. The wall, barbed wire and heavily guarded border strip that separated Germans in East and West for 28 years become permeable. That very night, tens of thousands of GDR citizens stream into the West, where they are enthusiastically welcomed. 9th November, 1857 hours. Schabowski informs the press.
In a press conference broadcast live by GDR television, Günter Schabowski, a member of the SED Politburo, answers a question about government measures against the wave of emigrants with the words, "We have already done something." I think you know that. No? Oh, excuse me. Then I will tell you. He then reads out from a piece of paper, haltingly, the decision of the GDR Council of Ministers, which hits the world like a bomb. Private travel to foreign countries can be applied for without preconditions, reasons for travel and family relations. The responsible passport and registration departments of the People's Police District offices in the GDR are instructed to issue visas for permanent departure without delay.
8 p.m. hours. Calm prevails in East Berlin.
Even an hour after the news of the opening of the borders was made public, no one in the GDR seems to have quite grasped the significance of the news. As usual, the border crossings to West Berlin are almost deserted at this hour. Gradually, however, rumors spread in the eastern part of the city that the border crossing at Bornholmer Strasse was open. 2020 Heer's Bundestag interrupts debate. From now on, GDR citizens can leave the country directly via all border posts between the GDR and the Federal Republic. When this breaking news from the news agencies reaches the parliament in Bonn, Bundestag President Rita Süssmuth, who is chairing a debate on the new law on the promotion of associations in front of a half-full plenum, interrupts the session. The MPs gather around the television screens in the lobby. 25 minutes after the announcement was made, the Minister of the Chancellor's Office, Rudolf Seiters, CDU, praised the event as a step of paramount importance. The parliamentary group leaders of the four parties represented in the Bundestag make similar statements. At 2108 HRS, some CDU MPs sing the national anthem. Most of the other parliamentarians join in. The session is then closed early.
9 p.m. hours crowds at border crossings.
In East Berlin, an unmanageable crowd waits in front of the checkpoints in Invalidenstrasse, Sonnenallee, and Bornholmer Strasse to be let through into the west. Those with travel documents are processed immediately.
10 p.m. hours traveling west in a Trabi.
Thousands of GDR citizens head for the border crossings in Trabants and Wartburgs. Clearance is slow.
23:14 hours Brandenburg Gate is open.
In East Berlin, a captain gives the order to open the barriers in view of the huge crowd. Thousands storm into West Berlin territory. Moving scenes take place at the sector borders. Foreigners cry and hug each other. Jubilant West Berliners form a line for the GDR cars. Thousands of human beings gather on both sides of the Brandenburg Gate. Undisturbed by the border police, they overcome the barriers and climb onto the top of the wall. Most East Berliners are drawn to Kurfürstendamm. The streets in the city are hopelessly overcrowded in no time.
23:50 hours Kohl interrupts visit to Poland.
Chancellor Helmut Kohl, who is on a state visit to Poland, 9.11. Daptinu Kwansi, 184, and received the news of the opening of the wall during a dinner with Prime Minister Tadeusz Mazowiecki, faces questions from journalists in Warsaw. Although he initially refuses to break off his trip, the next morning he decides to return to the Federal Republic for a day.
The 10th of November, 3:30 hours 50,000 visitors return.
West Berlin riot police and East Berlin border guards seal off the Brandenburg Gate, which Berliners were able to pass through unhindered for a few hours. The last of the 50,000 visitors return to East Berlin.
6 o'clock hours queues at the visa offices.
In many cities of the GDR, long queues of human beings want to apply for a visa for private travel to West Berlin form in front of the Volkspolizeikreisamt. Some have been waiting since the early hours of the morning in order to be the first when the authorities open at 8 hours. Photographers work extra shifts to provide those wanting to travel with passport photos for their application.
8 o'clock hours peaceful invasion from the east.
The authorities in the GDR are unable to cope with the rush, as each office can only process about 250 visa applications per hour. People's police officers tell those waiting that they can drive directly to the border for short visits. As a result, thousands crowd the checkpoints. The overtired border police finally just wave the jubilant human beings through. The GDR citizens then have to queue up in front of the 12 West Berlin district offices, where they receive a welcome allowance of DM 100.
9:30 hours. The happiest people in the world.
The governing mayor of West Berlin, Walter Momper SPD, who takes over as president of the Bundesrat on this very day, gives his inaugural speech in Bonn with a slight delay. His excuse: "I have not slept tonight, and I am sure many of you have not either." Anyone who experienced this night in Berlin or 9th of November 1989 will never be forgotten. Last night, the German people were the happiest people in the world. It was the day of reunion between the human beings from both parts of Berlin. It was the night when the wall lost its separating character. The people of the GDR fought for this freedom on their streets, and they celebrated this freedom for the first time yesterday.
5 p.m. hours. Rally in Berlin.
Several tens of thousands of human beings gather for a rally in front of Schöneberg Town Hall. Alongside Momper and Federal Foreign Minister Hans-Dietrich Genscher, the SPD's honorary chairman Willy Brandt, governing mayor of West Berlin at the time the wall was built in 1961, receives the strongest applause. The events of Friday night have confirmed that the perverse division of Germany does not endure. We are now in a situation where what belongs together is growing together again. Chancellor Kohl, who has arrived in Berlin in the meantime, can hardly make himself heard because of loud protests. His closing words: "It's about Germany. It's about unity and justice and freedom. Long live a free German fatherland, a free united Europe," are drowned out by a chorus of catcalls.
The 12th of November. 4 million visas in 3 days.
By noon on Sunday, the GDR authorities issue over 4 million visas for private travel to the West. In the same period, 10,144 citizens receive permits for permanent departure. The GDR opened several new border crossings to cope with the rush. The opening of the border at Potsdamer Platz in Berlin sees the first official meeting between the two mayors of the divided city. Momper West and Erhard Krack East affirm the new neighborly relations with a handshake. Chronik 1980, Chronik Verlag, Dortmund, Thursday, 9th November 1980.
The 9th of November, 1989.
The GDR opens its border to the west. The wall and barbed wire no longer separate. A new era begins for the human beings in both parts of Germany. Stages of a historic day.
18:57 hours. Schabowski informs the press.
In a press conference broadcast live on GDR television, CD Politburo member Günter Schabowski boredly pulls out a piece of paper and answers a question about government measures against the wave of emigrants. "We have already done something." "I think you know that." "No? Oh, excuse me. Then I will tell you." Schabowski then stockingly reads out that decision of the GDR Council of Ministers, which is disseminated a few minutes later by the news agency ADN and hits like a bomb all over the world. Private travel to foreign countries can be applied for without preconditions, reasons for travel, and family relations. The responsible passport and registration departments of the People's Police District offices in the GDR are instructed to issue visas for permanent departure without delay. Permanent departures can be made via all GDR border crossing points to the FRG or to Berlin West. Decision of the GDR Council of Ministers of 9.11. 1989.
8 p.m. hours. Rumors circulate in East Berlin.
In East Berlin, no one seems to realize what this announcement actually means. The border crossings to West Berlin are almost as deserted as usual at this hour. Gradually, however, rumors spread that the crossing at Baumholmer Strasse is open.
9 p.m. hours crowds at the checkpoints.
The picture has changed completely. An unmanageable crowd waits in front of the checkpoints in Invalidenstrasse, Sonnenallee, and Baumholmer Strasse to be let through to the west. Some of them are cleared, provided they have travel documents.
10 p.m. hours rally to the border.
Thousands of GDR citizens head for the border crossing in their Trabants and Wartburgs as if on a rally. The pressure grows. Many East Berliners hold out their identity cards to the guards through the iron gates and demand the exit stamp. Clearance is slow.
23:14 hours the barriers open.
The border troops can no longer cope with the onslaught. A captain gives the order to open the barriers. Thousands storm into West Berlin. Moving scenes take place at the sector crossings. Foreign human beings fall into each other's arms and cry. GDR cars drive through a line of cheering West Berliners. Most of them cannot yet comprehend what they are experiencing. Again and again the shouts, "It is unbelievable that I can still experience this," or simply "Ich glub," "Ich spinne" can be heard. Thousands of human beings gather on both sides of the Brandenburg Gate. Undisturbed by the border police, they cross the barriers and climb onto the top of the wall. Many hook themselves under and sing such a day, so beautiful like today. Most spontaneous visitors from the eastern part of the city, however, are drawn elsewhere. Which way to Kudamm? Is the most frequently asked question. Within no time at all, the streets of the city are hopelessly congested.
3:30 hours Brandenburg Gate closed again.
West Berlin riot police and East Berlin border guards seal off access to the Brandenburg Gate, through which Berliners were able to pass unhindered for a few hours. The last of the 50,000 or so visitors stream back to East Berlin. For the first time, Trabants pile up for kilometers on West Berlin territory.
Chronik 1989, Chronik Verlag, Dortmund, Thursday, 9th November 1989.
Eastern Europe, 1990, the year of free elections.
A storm of revolution swept the Stalinist autocrats from their positions of power in Eastern Europe last year. In the coming months, after decades of political monoculture, 5 Eastern European countries will hold free elections in which several parties will participate. The first of these will be held next weekend in the GDR. Concise answers to the following questions are compiled on this overview page. When and how did the revolution take place in these countries? How far has democratization progressed? What do the corresponding electoral laws correspond to? Which parties are standing for election and with what chances? What is the role of the Communist Party? GDR, the demonstration that was decisive for the overthrow of the communist state and party leadership, took place in Leipzig on the 9th of October 1989. Although no one knew whether there would be a massacre, 50,000 human beings dared to take to the streets that Monday. They demanded reforms and protested against the arrogant attitude of the Honecker Politburo towards the continuing mass exodus of GDR citizens that had become possible since the opening of the borders there via Hungary. In Leipzig, the battle cry of the GDR revolution emerged, "We are the people." In the following weeks, events came thick and fast. On the 17th of October, state and party leader Erich Honecker had to resign, and on the 9th of November, the new state and party leadership under Egon Krenz opened the Berlin Wall. At the beginning of December, the Krenz Politburo and the Central Committee also had to resign and might pass to the new government under Prime Minister Hans Madrow and the Round Table, which was constituted on the 7th of December. In fact, one can speak of democratic, though in part almost anarchic conditions, although formally outside the communist leadership, the old GDR constitution is still in force. Parliament has passed an electoral law and an association law which guarantee free, democratic and secret elections on the 18th of March. Elections are based on proportional representation, there is no blocking clause, and all parties and groups can participate as long as they do not represent militaristic, fascist, or anti-humanist aims. In the last few weeks, an almost unmanageable number of groups and parties have emerged, all of which want to participate in the election. Among the favorites, however, are mainly those that correspond to the federal German party spectrum. In other words, the GDR-SPD, the CDU-CSU-backed Alliance for Germany, which consists of the East CDU, the Democratic Awakening and the German Social Union, and a liberal alliance formed by the GDR Liberals. The GDR-FDP and the German Forum Party. With the GDR Liberals and the East CDU, two of the four former bloc parties, pseudo-bourgeois parties dominated by the SED, are thus among the favorites, while the National Democrats, which only came into being after the communist takeover, and the Peasants' Party are running in the election without Western help. The former state party SED is standing for election under a new leadership, a new program, and a new name as the Party of Democratic Socialism PDS. Also likely to play a role are Bündnis 90, an alliance of various civic movements including the New Forum and the GDR Greens. Apart from the United Left and other splinter groups, all parties, also the PDS, are committed to the social and ecological market economy and to German unity. The laws do not yet formally correspond to international standards, but the GDR has promised the UN Human Rights Commission the necessary adjustments after the 18th of March elections. Fem.
Tagesanzeiger, Zürich, Saturday, 10th March 1990. Hungary, CSSR, Romania, Bulgaria, see page 127.
However, the first tangible and substantial successes will only become evident in 1988, and within a very brief time afterward, they will begin to solidify to the point where the first major uprisings will begin in 1989, and terrestrials will experience their temporary apex in 1990. But I must state once again that you must remain silent on these matters for now.
I will do that. I do not want to endanger all of these future efforts.
Hungary.
There was no X-Day revolution in Hungary in the recent past. Nevertheless, the beginning of the process of upheaval can be dated precisely in retrospect. It was only with the removal of János Radar from the leadership of the Communist Party in May 1988 that the way was cleared for a political opening. For more than 30 years after the suppression of the popular uprising of 1956, Radar had determined the country's politics according to the motto: the people should live well and keep quiet about it. After his removal from power, the reform wing within the communists gained noticeable weight. Outside the party, the first to form was an ecological movement that wanted to prevent the construction of the Nagy-Maros-Danube embankment system. Demonstrations, also against Ceausescu's regime of terror, were permitted.
Step by step, the government, which was becoming increasingly emancipated from the party and the communist-dominated party, began to lay the legal foundations for a constitutional state.
In February last year, Hungary's communists became the first in Central and Eastern Europe to renounce their leading position in state and society, thus laying the foundation for a multi-party system. Exactly 31 years after their execution, Imre Nagy, the Prime Minister during the 1956 popular uprising, and his comrades in arms were solemnly buried. Hungary's people laid the Stalinist system to rest on that day. Parallel to the reforms at home, the foreign policy of the Warsaw Pact country also changed. The question of neutrality was raised, and with the opening of the Hungarian border to refugees from the GDR in September last year, Budapest made a decision that would change the map of Europe. Throughout this period, the communists were among the driving forces in the Hungarian reform process. In October, they finally broke with their past, dissolved the old party, and celebrated their resurrection as the Socialist Party. Following the Polish model, the roadmap for the democratization process up to the elections on the 25th of March was agreed at a round table with the newly founded parties and other social movements. In the process, the opposition defeated the communists' attempt to have the people elect a president before the elections by holding a referendum. 2 weeks before the elections, Hungary's election campaign is in full swing.
The parties are distinguishing themselves less with their own programs than in the fight against the communists.
More than 50 parties have submitted lists. 12 of them received the necessary support to put up candidates on the national list. Of the resurrected historical parties, only the small farmers play a serious role today. The 386 members of the unicameral parliament are elected in a complicated procedure, a combination of proportional and personal elections. Voter polls show a neck-and-neck race between the Democratic Forum, the League of Free Democrats, and the Party of Small Farmers. The former communists are expected to lose the election, gaining only about 10% of the vote. After the elections, Hungary will certainly be governed by a coalition. The relatively long preparation time for the elections compared to other Eastern European countries has also improved the equality of opportunity. However, the recently uncovered spying on opposition members has shown that old practices still live on in Hungary.
IFA.
CSSR.
It took just 10 days for mass demonstrations and a general strike in Prague and many cities in Czechoslovakia to bring down the old Stalinist bureaucratic system. The shake-up on the 17th of November last year came late, but went right to the supporting foundations. After a few days, the end of the communist monopoly on power was sealed. The passage on the leading role of the party in state and society was deleted from the constitution, and thus the way was open for a government of national consensus with a majority of non-communist ministers. With the election at the end of December of Alexander Dubček, the symbolic figure of the Prague Spring of 1968, as President of Parliament, and Václav Havel, the leading figure of the Charter 77 civil rights movement, as President of the state, the former opposition had the most important key positions in its hands. The revolution fomented by the students who were considered apolitical proceeded without violence, and has therefore been given the name Gentle Revolution. So far, only one communist is in prison, the former party leader of Prague, who was responsible for the last brutal police actions. At the end of February, the parliament in Prague, some of whose members have already been replaced, passed a new electoral law, paving the way for the first free elections in over 40 years. Here too, Prague is going its own way. For the time being, elections will only be held for 2 years. This creates the precondition for a party landscape to crystallize during this time, and prevents the conditions of the current transitional phase from being cemented. The main task of Parliament will be to draft a new constitution. Only parties and groups with either 10,000 members or 10,000 signatures of their voters are allowed to run in the elections. The election is based on the principle of proportional representation. Only parties that clear the 5% hurdle can enter the House of Representatives. The actual election campaign has been set at 40 days. The electoral law also regulates access to television and party financing. 3 months before the elections, the party landscape is still very confusing. Some 40 parties have already been registered. The greatest chances are given to the Civic Forum and the Slovakian sister organization Public Against Violence, which still want to contest these elections with their own lists. These umbrella organizations, which united the opposition after the revolution and took over the political leadership, are very heterogeneous movements, combining groupings from the left to the right, Greens, Socialists and Christians. Their common concern is the creation of a democracy and the linking of Czechoslovakia to Western Europe. The old satellite parties of the Communists, the People's Party and the Socialist Party also have a good starting position because they have an intact infrastructure and widely read daily newspapers. The Greens are predicted to win about 10% of the vote, while the Communists will have to be content with about 8%. The Social Democrats lost their entire structure after their merger with the Communists in 1948 and, like the Agrarian Party, which was the strongest party at the time, must first rebuild their entire apparatus. Offered.
Romania.
As bloody as Nicolae Ceausescu's regime of terror was, so was the revolution in Romania that brought about the fall of the dictator couple on the 22nd of December last year. 2.5 months later, however, many inconsistencies have come to light. Pictures of mass graves and torture chambers from the western Romanian city of Temesvar, where the revolution began, were faked. The number of deaths, given as 60,000 in the trial against Ceausescu, is still not known with absolute certainty. But the order of magnitude is probably in the region of 1,000. Fear and impatience currently dominate the political climate in Romania. After 45 years of totalitarian regime, there is great skepticism among the people, but also a need for protest, which then expresses itself in demonstrations and counter-demonstrations. Although the good intentions of President Ion Iliescu are not in doubt, the new political movements demand that safeguards be put in place quickly so that there can be no more relapse into totalitarianism. That is why, in the end, they agreed to the election date of the 20th of May, despite the short preparation time. The Front of a National Salvation, which took power after the revolution, has already had to share this power under the pressure of the newly emerging parties. In the Provisional Council of National Unity, which will function as parliament until the elections, the Rescue Front now occupies only half the seats. The electoral law, which was negotiated at the Round Table, provides that any registered party which requires 251 members can participate in the elections. The parliament consists of 2 chambers, a lower house and a senate, whose deputies are directly elected by all citizens over the age of 18. A president is then also directly elected by the people. Mandate holders can only be elected for a maximum of 2 terms. There is also a strict separation of powers. The electoral law also regulates access to television, which is currently the dominant information medium in Romania. Parties must disclose their financial sources, especially those from abroad. The participants at the Round Table also agreed that observers from the UN should follow the elections to guarantee that they are conducted in an orderly manner. With the formation of new parties, of which there are already over 40, the National Salvation Front, which will participate in the elections with its own lists, has also lost weight. Thanks to its support throughout the country and the fact that, apart from the military, it is currently the only factor that can guarantee a certain stability, the front's chances of doing well should not be bad. Its main competitors are the 3 historical parties, the National Taranist Peasants' Party, the Liberals and the Social Democratic Party, which, however, first have to build up a voter base. It is also clear that the Communist Party whose power structures were overrun and swept away in a few days, is not in a position to renew itself and participate in the elections as a force to be taken seriously. F.
Bulgaria.
The democratization process in Bulgaria began with a palace revolution. On the 10th of November last year, long-term ruler Todor Zhivkov was overthrown during a meeting of the Central Committee of the Communist Party. Today, he is in pre-trial detention awaiting trial. The party and government are now headed by a trio of committed reformers. Only with the departure of Zhivkov has the Bulgarian opposition been given freedom of movement to organize itself more broadly and to solicit support for its causes. The most important opposition groups, 7 independent movements and 5 parties, are united in the umbrella organization of the Union of Democratic Forces UDK. The main task of the UDK is to coordinate the actions of the heterogeneous opposition groups, because on their own each would be too weak to oppose the well-organized communists. What they all have in common is that they want to help democracy and the rule of law to prevail in Bulgaria. In the past 100 days, the Communist Party has tried to determine the extent and speed of the transformation process. In contrast to other countries in Central and Eastern Europe, the communists in Bulgaria are quite well anchored. Today they count about 10% of the population among their members. In January, the CP monopoly, which until then had been anchored in the constitution, also fell. In order to save as much as possible of their good position, the new strongman, Petr Mladenov, proposed to call the first free elections in 43 years in May. The opposition, which is still in its infancy, resisted this early election date for a long time, arguing that there would be too little time for serious preparations for the ballot. Thus, although the opposition now has its newspaper, the paper allocation remains limited. Since mid-January, there has also been a round table in Sofia. The negotiations, however, made only slow progress, and were repeatedly postponed and interrupted. The opposition tried to press their demands with mass demonstrations. Recently, a breakthrough was achieved when the communists made new concessions on important issues. The party agreed to dissolve its grassroots organizations in the workplaces and to discuss all important bills first at a round table before submitting them to Parliament. Election observers from East and West are to be invited to Bulgaria. As a further gesture to the opposition, the postponement of the elections by 1 month was proposed. This means that elections would now be held in June and not in November as demanded by the opposition. This week they want to sit down again at the round table to negotiate a party law and an electoral law. According to an initial opinion poll taken a month ago, the communists would still have emerged victorious in the elections. They would win half as many votes as the entire opposition bloc. The Peasants' Party, until a few weeks ago a bloc party, has emerged as the third force but has now left the government and is pursuing an independent policy. AFR.
Rejoicing in Tirana over announced democratization first new party in Albania.
Albania's ruling Communist Party has received competition a day after it announced it would admit other parties. Students, intellectuals, and workers gathered at the University of Tirana yesterday afternoon to form the Democratic Party. Thousands had cheered the democratization in Tirana last night. Belgrade SDA AFPR, according to an advisor of the new political grouping, Gramos Pashko, the new opposition party intends to participate in the parliamentary elections in February with its own candidates. The Democratic Party will be Albania's first independent party. The decision to democratize was taken after several days of student unrest in Tirana by the CP Central Committee at a plenary session chaired by state and party leader Ramiz Alia. The CC also decided to remove 5 Politburo members and 2 candidates considered dogmatists and opponents of reform, including former Interior Minister Simon Stefani and former chief ideologue Foto Kami. Stefani had been replaced as Interior Minister in the summer in connection with the 5,000 Albanians who fled to Western embassies. According to Western observers in Tirana, the reshuffling of the party leadership paves the way for the long-announced domestic reforms. As recently as mid-November, Alia had declared that a multi-party system was not on the agenda. After the introduction of freedom of travel in May, spectacular economic reforms were announced in July, the first steps of which provide for the admission of the hitherto forbidden private sector. Finally, since November, the churches and mosques that were closed in 1967 have been open again.
Der Landbote Winterthur, 13th December 1990.
Only time will tell the success rate these efforts will bring.
Slowly, some hope is rising within me, and I will put all of this into the drawer of my lost memories, so I do not endanger anything. But surely I can inform the core group members.
You will be permitted to speak about everything when the events become more apparent.
By then I will have forgotten it all. So it looks like as the end of the 1980s approaches, we soon can expect some rays of hope in regard to a worldwide improvement of freedom and peace. Then the world will look a bit better.
Yes, so it will. But now I must leave. Moreover, you are tired. Goodbye, Hel.
Good, and quite loving thanks, girl. Greet everyone rather nicely and dearly for me, and so then, until Thursday or Friday. Take care,